Chapter 1229. This is Earth? The home of those humans? In space, a lady dressed in a luxurious robe looked at the screen in front of her. On it was the image of the outside world of the spaceship. It was a blue planet. The lady had short hair and was not particularly beautiful. However, she had a dignified aura that would strike fear into the hearts of anyone who saw her. 6 arms extended from the back of the robe. However, what caught people's attention the most was that each of her arms was emitting a faint golden glow as if they were made of metal. They were completely different from the other members of the 8-armed race. 3rd shaman were finally here. Another lady from the 8-armed race let out a long sigh. It was a novelty when they first boarded the spaceship. However, after a few months, the novelty faded and only boredom was left. I don't even dare to train here. I'm afraid that I'll crush those weak humans in the equally weak spaceship. Although those humans are weak, their things are quite interesting. We can move those interesting things back to the mother planet. They won't have any objections anyway. Of course, once we arrive at that place called Earth, even if they have any objections, it will depend on our mood. The 200 square meter room was furnished with a sofa, a soft bed, and a bar counter. Such a large room on the spaceship was considered extravagant. 6 ladies from the 8-armed race were either standing or sitting in the room. They were of different ages. The only thing they had in common was that they all had 8 arms. Other than the 3rd shaman, 2 of them had arms that emitted different shades of metallic luster. From their positions and expressions, it was clear that the 3rd shaman of the 8-arm race had the highest status. The 3rd shaman gestured for everyone to stop. According to those humans, there are powerhouses among them too. Those humans are so weak. The strongest among them is only a member of the 4-armed race. Those so-called powerhouses are only the strongest among the humans, one of the 8-armed race ladies said casually. The 3rd shaman did not refute. She had a similar opinion. No matter what, the most important thing this time is to understand the situation of the humans and get them to teach us how to build spaceships that can travel in the astral world. Apart from that, their technology is also very useful to our race, the 3rd shaman said slowly. In the 8-armed race's knowledge system, the astral world was beyond the mother planet. In the language of the humans, it was called outer space. Therefore, we are not allowed to act recklessly. It's best that humans are weak. We can make more things. The 3rd priest warned. Then his tone changed. Of course, we have to let them understand the gap between us and them. Lord Priestess, please don't worry, the others said one after another. The 3rd shaman's lips curled into a smile. This was the plan that they had decided on before they came. To them, humans were as fragile as children. Even if they possessed powerful weapons and some useful technology, in the face of true power, everything had to bow down to it. Originally, it was the astral world that prevented them from exerting their power. However, when they came to Earth, it was like a baby with a huge fortune who opened the door to protect himself. At this moment, in the command hall, there was a wavy pattern in the air in one of the corners. When one got closer, one could hear voices. It was the voices of the 8-arm race members conversing in the hall. Have you analyzed it? What are they talking about? The commander in the general uniform asked in a deep voice. No. This language is different from their official language. It's their ancient language that ordinary people can't grasp. It's only used by the royal family, the nobles, and the temple. Therefore, we don't have enough samples and can't analyze it for the time being. Furthermore, this language involves some very complicated things. When they use this language, a strange magnetic field will appear. This will take a longer time to analyze. Forget it. No matter what they are planning. The base is ready. The commander relaxed his brows. He hoped that everything would go smoothly. It was said that the demons were in the base and should be able to contend against the 8-arm race members. The commander was more concerned about his family and would be able to see them soon. Half an hour later, with a slight vibration, everyone in the command hall cheered. They were finally home. Informed the envoys of the 8-arm race. Although the commander hadn't completely relaxed, he wasn't as tense as before. At the large space station outside the node, everyone and the spacecraft had been inspected to prevent the microorganisms from the Horn Dragon galaxy from being brought to Earth. Otherwise, they would have to go through 2 weeks of quarantine before they could go home. However, they only needed to settle everything in 3 days before they could go on vacation. As the door of the spacecraft opened, Renbachian looked at the honor guards in formal attire lining up on both sides of the red carpet. This gave him a sense of déjà vu when he watched the news broadcasts of various heads of state visiting. It seems like there should be flowers at this time, Renbachian thought. Then he saw 4 beautiful women selected from various countries standing at the bottom of the gangway with flowers in their hands. Rinpoche had a strange expression on his face. He didn't know who had arranged this welcoming ceremony. Aiming nuclear bombs and 100 electromagnetic cannons at this place is a better way to express the goodwill of humans than flowers, Rinpoche said softly with a smile. His voice wasn't loud, but it was just loud enough for the people around him to hear. The others acted as if they didn't hear anything. There were high-level officials from various countries here. Even if they weren't the top few, who would dare to aim nuclear bombs at this place? A few experts came out first. They were all real experts who were responsible for communicating with the 8-armed race. Then they saw a few tall figures of women with arms that looked like the 1,000-armed Guanyin. They are here. The envoys of the various countries made preparations to welcome the extraterrestrial guests. Suddenly, a ripple seemed to explode in the air, and a huge amount of energy exploded in front of them. From the Ba-arm race's envoys, there seemed to be energy pillars that reached the sky. A huge pressure came from the front, causing people to lower their heads and not dare to look directly at them. Bastard. Everyone had the same thought in their minds. What are they going to do? Everyone tried their best to straighten their spines and necks, wanting to look directly at the other party. They were the top group of people on Earth and they represented humanity. No one wanted to bow down to the extraterrestrial guests. However, the huge difference in strength made every bone in their bodies groan. If the other party had the intention to kill, at least half of the people present would have exploded and died under this huge pressure. Fortunately, another huge aura erupted from the crowd at this time, reducing the pressure brought by the 8-armed race's envoys by more than half. The Empress, who was dressed in red, sneered with a cold look in her eyes as she strode forward. These damned foreign races. Although the Empress didn't mind being used as a weapon when there were benefits, she wouldn't be so proactive. However, these envoys from the 8-armed race reminded her of the damned foreign races outside the wall of the two world. She thought about the battle that had just ended. She thought about the people who had died. This gave her the urge to slap the other party to death. Streaks of barbaric and wild patterns appeared on the Empress's body. A few tall figures followed the Empress and walked out from the crowd. Their faces were filled with malevolent, murderous intent. These ancient race experts, who were like savages, exploded the moment their auras collided. Die. The expert from the 8-armed race, who was standing in front of the gangway, exclaimed in surprise. Chapter 1230. The aura of the Empress was like a sharp sword that pierced through the mountain-like aura of the people from the 8-armed race, greatly reducing the pressure on the rest of the people. At the same time, the people from the 8-armed race were astonished. The humans have such experts? The expressions of the people from the 8-armed race changed and they looked gloomy. If the humans had such experts, they wouldn't be able to use many of their tricks. But how was that possible? After interacting with the 8-armed race for a few months, they could tell that the humans didn't have any experts through their actions and words. Especially when the experts from the 8-armed race demonstrated their strength, the humans' shock and disbelief weren't a lie. This convinced them that the strength of the 8-armed race and above was beyond the reach of an individual human and even beyond their knowledge. From their observations, ordinary humans weren't even comparable to the children of the 8-armed race. The experts among the humans were only equivalent to the 4-armed members of the 8-armed race, which could be achieved as long as they reached adulthood. The various performances made the 8-armed race believe that although the humans had advanced technology that they didn't have, the humans were naturally weak and had low individual strength. They possessed powerful weapons and technology, but their actual strength was weak. This kind of race inevitably gave them some ideas. Just like children with guns, although dangerous, their threat would be greatly reduced as long as they weren't given a chance to attack. Furthermore, these children had a huge amount of wealth that made people drool. Of course, the 8-armed race wasn't as rude and vicious as the Thunder Barbarians, and they weren't as arrogant as the Thunder Barbarians. What they wanted was to get what they wanted at the lowest cost, especially those technologies that they coveted, spaceships, crew members that helped them operate the spaceships, and other things that they were interested in. As such, they were prepared to display their strength as soon as they got off the spaceship and see how the humans would respond. However, they didn't expect to encounter humans who could rival them as soon as they arrived on Earth. And they weren't alone. The lady in red at the front seemed to have an aura similar to that of the third priest and was one step away from the ancestral reversion realm. The people behind her were slightly weaker, but they were also at the blood birth realm. The third priest's expression changed. The queens and the high priest had guessed wrongly. There were actually experts among the humans. This was going to be troublesome. If they hadn't provoked them earlier, they would naturally be able to communicate peacefully. However, they first released their auras and pressured the humans with their auras. They couldn't hold back now. The third priest was muttering to himself. The rest of the people had withdrawn their auras and focused on the Empress. Both parties were at loggerheads. At this moment, the Empress leaped tens of meters into the air without saying a word. Her snow-white fist appeared out of thin air, and everyone seemed to see a gigantic fist that was tens of meters in size appear in the air. Like a cannonball, it blasted toward the Empress. The expressions of everyone at the back changed drastically. Everyone was grateful that this great demon had stepped forward to stop the ill-intentioned Ba Pai people. Even the Americans who had half of the city destroyed by her felt the same way. However, no one expected that she would brazenly make a move without saying a word. The foreign ambassadors had just arrived on Earth and hadn't even gotten off the spaceship. Without saying a single word, she had already made her move. This was too ferocious. It was too barbaric. It was too satisfying. When it came to scheming, and fighting for benefits, humans were not weaker than any other race. Just now the 8-arm race had used their aura to suppress everyone. Everyone only needed to think a bit to understand their intentions. Although everyone felt that it was a little rude to see the Empress making a move, they were happy to teach the 8-armed race a lesson. How dare you? A member of the 8-arm race with a greenish-gray metallic sheen on his arms leaped into the air. As he waved his 8 arms, a huge greenish-gray flower bloomed in the air like a lotus platform. This lotus-like flower didn't look eye-catching, but it was extremely dangerous. Those who were close to it could feel a gust of wind brushing past their faces, leaving behind a bloody scar. The moment the gigantic fist in the air touched the edge of the lotus platform, it was as if it was cut by a knife. In the air, the patterns on the Empress's body became denser and covered almost all of her exposed skin. Her aura rose again and again, and she charged into the lotus platform with large strides. Boom! The two of them separated in the air as soon as they came into contact. The lotus platform disappeared, and a figure shot out and crashed directly into the spaceship. The fist that was tens of meters in size in the air was frightening. It gathered all of its strength in one place and didn't release it at all. This was what it was like to hit someone. The Empress stood in the air and looked down at the Ba Pai people's ambassadors. She stared coldly at one of the 8-armed women in a long robe with a faint golden metallic sheen. The third priest looked up and saw that the victor had been decided in one move. The third priest already knew that he was the only one who could stop the Empress. All of you stand down. The third priest said as everyone walked out from the back. She was holding a long staff with both hands. The people beside her bowed and revealed the 8 long knives on their backs. The third priest could reach out and pull them out. The battle between the Empress and the third priest was about to start at any moment. Everyone could feel the killing intent in the air. At this moment, everyone heard a loud, Hey, can you hear me? Are you here to fight? Or is this your etiquette? The Ba Pai people. The sound was as sharp and ear-piercing as metal scraping against each other, almost piercing their eardrums. Everyone wanted to cover their ears when they heard this sound. They turned around and saw a bald man holding a megaphone that was more than 3 meters long. The higher-ups of the various countries were at a loss. Where did this megaphone come from? Isn't this human etiquette? The third priest turned around and looked at Rinpoche as his voice rang in everyone's ears. Your Chinese is not bad. You know the whole story. If this continues, we will think that the Ba Pai people are here to demonstrate their might and want to provoke a war with the humans. All the people from the Ba Pai people glared at Rinpoche. The third priest's eyes were also filled with coldness. The eyes of the leaders of the various countries twitched. Old Li looked at Rinpoche and then at the people from the Ba Pai people who had yet to disembark from the spaceship. Inform everyone to prepare for battle. Put down the flowers and pick up your weapons. The Americans almost jumped up when they heard this. However, before they could finish, they were stopped by the man in the middle. Shut up, Brown. If they want war, we will give them war. Of course, everyone knew that this was impossible, but they still had to show their attitude. The people from the other countries pondered for a while and didn't speak again. Now humans were on the same side. When he heard the voice behind him, Rinpoche said in a deep voice, Our goal is peace. We want the intelligent races to develop together and advance hand in hand. This is the common pursuit of all intelligent races. However, if you want war, then we will give you war. Although the third priest didn't fully understand, he realized that everyone's gaze had changed. The human soldiers in the distance dispersed into battle formations and picked up their long-barreled weapons. This is troublesome. The third priest frowned. These humans were tougher than she thought. Most importantly, there were experts among the humans who could compete with them. Their plan couldn't be realized from the start. Sir. The people from the Ba Pai people behind her drew their weapons and got into a defensive stance. The third priest pressed her arm down and said, "Everyone stop." She then looked up at the Empress and placed her hands on her chest. "We came with goodwill." Chapter 12:31. Gullies appeared on the surface of the sea as if the sea had been cut into several sections. Then the seawater flowed backward, creating huge waves. 100 meters above the sea, two figures were moving so fast that the human eye couldn't keep up with their speed. Only by slowing down the speed by 10 times could one barely see the blurry figures. It was unknown how many pairs of eyes were watching all of this from behind the screen. Many people had shocked expressions on their faces. Looking at all the data, the Empress in red was much stronger than when she was in the United States. The most surprising thing was that the envoy from the 8 Arms race had an energy value of 45,000, but it was now close to 60,000. The Empress in red usually had an energy value of 30,000. But when her body was covered with dark purple patterns, her energy value soared to 60,000 as well. Both of their strengths had increased by a large margin. Many people took pictures of the patterns on the surface of the Empress's skin to study what they contained. These patterns are likely to be something like an energy transmission circuit structure. If we can study it and put it on the surface of the skin, it can increase our strength. Unfortunately, a large number of the patterns are blocked by her clothes. We need those blocked patterns to gain something. A bespectacled man looked obsessively at the patterns on an enlarged picture. He turned his head and looked at the others with anticipation. The others pretended not to hear him. Who would dare to make such a request? They probably wouldn't even have the chance to collect their corpses. Rinpoche sat cross-legged on the beach as the battle between the Empress and the third priest appeared in the air in front of him. More than 20 people from the 8 Arms race stood 100 meters away. Following the intense collision between the two, huge waves exploded on the surface of the sea as if countless bombs were exploding in the water. The two of them separated again after a brief collision, and their figures remained in the air. The color of the Empress's skin was already indistinguishable. It was completely covered in dark purple patterns as if she was possessed. Her eyes were bloodshot and looked like they were about to drip blood. Her red clothes were slightly damaged and there were blood stains on her hands. The staff in the third priest's hand was almost deformed, and only 4 of the 6 sabers were left. Phew! The Empress let out a long breath as the patterns on her body began to recede. She moved her feet and walked toward the beach. This was just a sparring match and it wasn't a fight to the death. If they continued fighting, it would be difficult to stop. This was the 3rd day since the 8 Arms race arrived on Earth. Both sides intended to spar and test each other's skills. After all, strength was strength and combatability was combatability. Take the Earth Spirit Clan for example. Their ability to use their power was very low, and they couldn't compare to humans at the same level. On the other hand, the 8 Armed race's fighting ability wasn't weak. At the same level, they weren't any weaker than humans. The Empress was having a hard time fighting them. It was especially so when the 6 sabers were brandished like a storm of blades. On the other hand, the long staff was both offensive and defensive. How was it? Rinpoche stood up and asked when he saw the Empress land on the beach. Not bad. The Water Empress nodded slightly as a form of praise. Over the years, the Empress had fought with many experts. Her confidence and foresight had been nurtured through countless battles. For them to take the initiative to praise the other party, it was evident that the strength of the 8 Armed race wasn't weak. The envoy this time was only the 3rd high priest. Above him were 2 other high priests, many queens and some other experts. In particular, the high priest and the queens were all experts who had taken that step. Even the Empress found it difficult to face them head-on. Sure enough, Earth and Dayo can't be connected at all. It's the same as when the heaven-grade weapon was brought over and directly cut off contact with its original owner. Furthermore, that ancestral mark has nothing to do with one's blood chi, Rinpoche said casually. When the Empress unleashed her blood chi with all her might, an illusory human figure filled with savagery would appear behind her. As her strength increased, the illusory figure would become more solid and increase her strength to a certain extent. At present, it could increase her strength by at least 15%. However, when she unleashed her full strength on Earth, the illusory figure didn't appear. It was evident that the illusory figure was only related to the world that Dayo was in and had nothing to do with blood chi. That is the mark left by the ancestors of the human race in this world, the Empress said. Rinpoche nodded. According to the Empress, that was a mark left by the ancestors of the human race in this world. When the strength of the human race reached a certain level and activated their blood chi with all their might, that mark would condense. This was something that current technology couldn't understand. Ren Baqin turned to look at the Empress. Although her expression was cold, he could see the joy in her eyes and that she was in a good mood due to their familiarity. With her strength, she was already invincible among the human race. Furthermore, she rarely had the opportunity to fight with experts from the foreign races. It was rare for her to meet an opponent who was similar in strength to her. If we establish friendly relations with the eight-armed race, there will be more opportunities to learn from each other in the future. When your majesty improves, you can learn from the queens of the eight-armed race. Ren Baqin said. Not bad. The Empress nodded and was in a better mood. Someone was already waiting at the side. After the two parties bade farewell, they took the eight-armed race delegation elsewhere and officially began their visit to Earth. Until now, the eight-armed race still couldn't understand why the Empress, with her strength and bearing, wasn't a member of the upper echelons of the human race. In their opinion, the leader of a race was usually the strongest person in the race. However, humans were completely different. The higher-ups of the human race that they saw were all very weak. Ren Baqin felt that this was normal. In his opinion, in the absence of external enemies, the higher the level of civilization, the lower the value of individual strength. After leaving the base, Ren Baqin and the Empress went to another laboratory to conduct a test on the Earth Spirit. The results were as expected. When the Earth Spirit died on Earth, the electromagnetic waves dispersed by 10 meters before dissipating. They didn't disappear into thin air like they did in Dayo. It was as if they had entered another space and were sent back after their bodies recovered. It was like uploading and downloading data. On Earth, the electromagnetic waves would disperse after traveling for 30 feet, just like ordinary electromagnetic waves, before finally dissipating. At the same time, the physical recovery ability of the Earth Spirit also disappeared. It was a little unexpected, but it was also reasonable. Ren Baqin reckoned that it was because the life form they shared wasn't in the same world, so they couldn't transmit life force. After obtaining the results of the experiment, Ren Baqin was even more interested in the deity of the Earth Spirit. Whether it was life-sharing or divine sense, soul, they could be transmitted and received just like uploading and downloading data. If he could crack this ability, he would be able to create an immortal body. Ren Baqin thought about it. Even if he could crack the uploading and downloading ability of divine sense, he could use cloning technology to directly replace the body and create an immortal body. Furthermore, he wouldn't have to worry about being captured and tortured to death like the Earth Spirit. Ren Baqin felt excited at the thought of this, but the biggest problem was how to capture the deity of the Earth Spirit. Based on the deity's ability to break through space, it was impossible to capture him. Chapter 1232. In Ren Baqin's Sea of Knowledge, there was a planet that was green but had no vitality. A towering Buddha statue that reached the clouds sat on the ground. The face of the Buddha statue looked 70% similar to Ren Baqin's. There was a five-colored luster around it that was constantly changing. Ren Baqin's figure floated in front of the head of the Buddha statue, nodding his head as he looked at his work. To practice this wish concentration technique, one had to condense a statue of a deity with the power of the five elements in the Sea of Knowledge. According to the ancient scroll of methods, the five elements were formed in the Sea of Knowledge, and then the statue of a deity was condensed from the five elements. Ren Baqin knew very well that his cultivation was different from others. He had shrunk his Sea of Knowledge into a singularity and then exploded it to create a universe. This was the result of his previous studies and the understanding of the universe that he had obtained. If others didn't have this knowledge, it would be impossible to have such a universe, let alone form a planet. After all, the formation of each person's Sea of Knowledge was related to their knowledge of the world. The Sea of Knowledge of others was either chaotic with the five elements or a small world, and the statue that condensed would occupy most of the Sea of Knowledge. However, Ren Baqin was different. The universe in his Sea of Knowledge was too big. If he wanted to erect a statue that occupied most of the world in the universe, he didn't know how long it would take. After thinking for a long time, he simply condensed such a Buddha statue on a planet. Presumably, this statue was about the same size as the predecessors. The condensation of this statue was only the first step. It was just an empty frame made of clay and wood. Next, he had to use the power of the Sea of Knowledge to nurture this statue and bring it to life step by step until it became a seed. Then he could proceed to the next step, which was to cut it out and connect it with incense. It would receive worship throughout the 4 seasons and become a deity. The most difficult thing for others was to accumulate incense, but it was the easiest for Ren Baqin. The only problem was that it required time. In the situation of ruling a country, Ren Baqin didn't lack any external things. I don't know if this deity can make a wish, such as growing some hair. Rinpoche touched his bald head and felt that it felt pretty good. It was as smooth as a mirror. Hair didn't matter much, but the rest was a big worry for him. Vultures didn't look good. Then he went to another planet to take a look. The land of the planet was densely packed with stone tablets. It was like a forest of tablets. At a glance, there were hundreds of thousands or even millions of them. Every stone tablet was equivalent to a book. Rinpoche would flip through the books and record them every time he returned to Earth. It didn't take much time to record a book. These stone tablets included all aspects of his life and were his most important savings. Even if he were to be trapped in Dayo one day and never be able to return to Earth, these stone tablets would be enough to support the foundation of Dayo's technology and develop it to a certain level. After coming out of his sea of knowledge, he smelled the Empress's fragrance and hugged her. In terms of height, Rinpoche was only 5 centimeters taller than the Empress. Both of them looked about the same when they stood side by side. In terms of body size, Rinpoche could fit 3 of her. However, the Empress could defeat 8 of them with a single finger. For the next few days, he nurtured the statue and practiced the use of the 5 elements. He was able to manifest the power of the 5 elements before attaining the spirit wheel level, but he was clumsy in his operation. Now that he could communicate with heaven and earth through his sea of knowledge, his control of the 5 elements had increased tremendously. Even though he couldn't command them as if they were his own arms, he could use a lot more techniques and play some tricks. For example, the 5 Fireball sect. Rinpoche felt that he had finally become the tall, rich and handsome mage of his dreams. A mage who was 175 meters tall and weighed 150 kilograms was a beautiful sight to behold. Other than that, he would return to Earth with the Empress from time to time to participate in the meetings between the various countries and the diplomatic group of the 8 Arms race. The various countries were still wary of the 8 Arms race, and the Empress would usually be present during the meetings. When facing the aliens, the people of Earth were united. However, the various countries were also cautious. For example, the United States seemed to have had many contacts with the diplomatic group of the 8 Arms race in private. Their intentions were easy to guess. More than 20 years ago on Earth, the former Rinpoche, the Empress, and a few others defeated a large country. Even the president at that time was pushed out as a scapegoat. Such a humiliation wouldn't be easily forgotten even after more than 20 years had passed. Rinpoche simply looked on coldly from the sidelines. No matter what intentions they had, there were only a few people in the 8 Arms race who could pose a threat to the Empress, and the United States was close at hand. Rinpoche was more concerned about the progress of the multi-party negotiations. Earth would provide technological support to the 8 Arms race, including but not limited to industrial, agricultural, smelting and medical resources as well as the training of some talents. The most important point was that Earth would provide the 8 Arms race with a portion of their spaceships and train their talents. In the eyes of the 8 Arms race, they would be able to attack and defend with spaceships, and they could even use them to travel to Earth. Rinpoche could only say that they knew nothing about technology. Not to mention anything else, there would definitely be a backdoor in the control system of their spaceships. Without specific data, they wouldn't even be able to find the location of the nodes. However, what they had obtained so far was enough to satisfy the 8 Arms race. Correspondingly, the 8 Arms race would mark out an area on Moros, the mother planet of their language, allow Earth to build a city there, and provide some resources from Moros. In addition, the 8 Arms race would also send experts to attack the 4-leaf clover planet together with Earth. This was also something that Earth valued greatly. Both the 4-leaf clover planet and Moros had many resources that were extremely useful to Earth. In addition, the vitality on these 2 planets was much more abundant than on Earth, and the upper limit for cultivation was also much higher. As long as they could gain a foothold in the Horn Dragon Galaxy, Earth would be able to train a large number of powerful warriors. Earth's current target was the continent that they had previously occupied on the 4-leaf clover planet. Its area wasn't much smaller than the American continent, and China would be able to obtain 1/3 of China's land there. Rinpoche would be able to obtain 80,000 square kilometers of land, which was equivalent to half of Yu province. Nominally, this land still belonged to China, but in fact, it was equivalent to private territory. Whether it was building a city or mining resources on it, the country wouldn't interfere too much. It seemed like Rinpoche had gained a great advantage, but in fact the gains weren't that great. After all, the distance between Earth and the Horn Dragon Galaxy was too far, and transportation was difficult. Not only would it take a lot of time, but it would also require a huge investment of funds and resources. It could be said that the desired results might not be achieved within a few decades. Moreover, Rinpochen had to pay a price for this land. However, these were all acceptable to Rinpochen. The distance between the two galaxies was long and transportation was difficult, but it wasn't a big problem for Rinpochen. Now he only needed 1.5 days to travel between the two worlds and could completely transport some of the aboriginals there for development. He could also use this as a backup plan. More importantly, he could also train some experts here. In Dayo, Rinpochen could make a round trip in 2 days. Each trip, Rinpochen could carry more than 1,000 kilograms. If the weight wasn't too high, he could carry 10 people at a time. If they were from the Yun Nation or the Jing tribe, Rinpochen could even carry 20 people. In a year, Rinpochen could make 180 round trips, which was equivalent to 2,000 to 3,000 people. Rinpochen had already made plans to choose talented warriors. Coupled with natural reproduction, Dayo would have tens of thousands of warriors and tens of thousands of children in a few years. Moreover, the flow of time between the two sides was different. When the next war started, he might be able to harvest a batch of Cardinal Heaven or even Immortal Heaven warriors. The only limitation is power, Rinpochen said to the Empress. However, there was nothing he could do about this. Power wasn't a specialty in the spiritual sense cultivation system. If I had the power of your majesty, I might really be able to create an army. The Empress thought for a while and said, according to records there are some medicines that can increase strength. Although they are rare, they aren't non-existent. When you return, let Shiwanya pass on my decree. Every village will find medicines that can increase strength and hand them over. There will be some gains. In addition, there are many body-strengthening techniques that can increase strength. I will watch you practice them. Rinpochen touched his shiny forehead. He had to practice again. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed on Earth. The Eight Arms race had a certain understanding of Earth, and the discussions between the two sides were almost over. Half of the Eight Arms race delegation would stay on Earth while the other half would return to their home planet. After all, the details of the discussion still needed the approval of the many queens of the Eight Arms race. In general, both sides had no objections. At most, they would make some changes in the details. At the same time, Earth was also busy preparing for the upcoming colonial war. At the same time, Rinpochen was also making various preparations. Chapter 1233. Master, do you want a Lolita who knows how to act cute, warm the bed, and is soft and easy to push? No, I want a child. Rinpochen calmly turned his head and looked behind him. Honeysuckle didn't follow him. After all, a father still cared about his reputation. The Lolita in the swimsuit turned pale with fright and immediately turned gray with a row of vertical stripes. Cut the crap and give me the combination of martial arts. Rinpochen pulled a chair over and sat down. In the past half a month, he had people input most of the martial arts into the superbrain 24 hours a day. The superbrain analyzed the combination of martial arts that could increase one's strength the most and wouldn't conflict with each other. In fact, most of the books in the palace and the academy had already been inputted into the library, and they were still being collected over the years. This was equivalent to an update. Wild boar with no sense of aesthetics. The Lolita muttered. The corpse and ghost scroll, heaven seal technique, and blood flame saber. The combination of these three martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,300 kilograms. The 10 ultimate books, earth-shocking book, and army-breaking fist. The combination of these three martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,600 kilograms. The roaring tiger fist, salvation chart, tyrannical viper technique, and snake-scorpion poison technique. The combination of these four martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,700 kilograms. The Lolita listed more than a dozen martial arts combinations that Rinpochen could practice. It didn't take long to increase one's strength by 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms. They were all combinations of 3 to 4 martial arts. Any more and they would affect each other and the benefits wouldn't be great. The martial arts might even conflict with each other. Many of these martial arts required precious medicinal baths, but this didn't matter to Rinpochen. Rinpochen took the list from the printer at the side. The names on it were all very cool. As for the actual effect, it wasn't bad. After all, the main effect of most martial arts wasn't to increase one's strength. Strength was just a side effect. For example, the corpse and ghost scroll. After practicing, one would become ghostly and inhuman. However, one's body was extremely hard and could withstand swords and knives. After reaching the spirit wheel level, the heaven seal technique could condense heaven-grade weapons and freeze people. Although one couldn't move as long as someone cooperated, they could easily kill an expert of the same level. Rinpoche listened to the little Lolita's analysis of the advantages and disadvantages of various martial arts combinations and finally chose the 10 ultimate books, Earth-Shocking Book, and the combination of the Army-Breaking Fist. However, this was where his advantage lay. With the support of sufficient resources, it was not difficult to cultivate the 10 ultimate books and the Earth-Shaking Tome. However, the last technique, the Army-Shattering Fist, required the tempering of life and death on the battlefield in order to progress quickly. This gave Rinpoche a headache. If it was just a battlefield, they could just start a war. However, if they needed to be tempered by life and death situations, then only the outsiders could do so. Fortunately, after practicing the other two martial arts, he would be able to have 1,100 pounds of strength. In the future, he would see if he could use the other martial arts to replace the regiment-shattering fist. The order to collect all kinds of natural treasures that could increase one's strength had been sent to all the villages in the 60,000 mountains. The Protectorate of the South had even sent a group of experts to search the dangerous areas. It was easy to cultivate in the government, not to mention that he was in control of a country and had the support of a country. 3 days later, Rinpoche couldn't laugh anymore. The Empress sat on a chair and watched the television dramas from the past 20 years. She held a bowl of sorghum wine in one hand and a whip in the other. One of the eyes saw that Rinpoche's movements were slightly slower, and the whip broke through the air and lashed at the side of Rinpoche's feet. The 20-centimeter thick flagstone immediately turned into powder. Soon after, he heard the sound of the air exploding. This was the sound of the whip breaking through the sound barrier. The corners of Rinpoche's eyes twitched. Practice. The Empress looked at Rinpoche with one eye and watched the television drama with the other. Rinpoche was speechless. Your Majesty, one of your eyes is on the left and the other on the right. It's as if you were hit by the 7 wounds fist. Pah. This time the whip really hit him. When Rinpoche practiced the yang boosting technique, he lost all his hair and became bald, but he was also invulnerable. However, after this whip hit him, a bloody scar immediately appeared on his body. The area around the wound was like a crack after metal had been split open. Hiss. Rinpoche recalled that run under the setting sun, the youth that had passed away, and the 8-year-old little girl from more than 20 years ago. Fortunately, no one saw it. It had to be said that the Empress's character was extremely good in some aspects. Knowing that Rinpoche would be beaten today, she didn't even leave anyone to serve him. This was more or less saving him some face. Rinpoche continued to immerse himself in his boxing practice. Every day he would handle affairs in the morning, practice boxing in the afternoon, and nurture the statue at night. Half a month later there was good news. 3 fruits that could increase one's strength were found in the 60,000 mountains. These rare treasures were rare, but they weren't impossible to obtain. It was just that there wasn't a need for them in the past, and no one had been sent to specifically search for them. Even if someone occasionally found them, they would keep them for themselves. Now that the state had mobilized many experts from the government and many villages in the 60,000 mountains to search together, they quickly found something. The biggest difficulty was that the 60,000 mountains were too big, and most of these rare treasures were in unexplored areas or dangerous places with many ferocious beasts. After all, those that were easy to find had already been eaten. After the 3 earth fruits were found, there was one after another good news. The materials needed to practice the 10 ultimate manuals were finally complete. As a result, the speed at which Rinpoche practiced the 10 ultimate manuals began to soar. After another half a month, the 3 earth fruits were in Rinpoche's hands. They were 3 fist-sized fruits that looked like persimmons and gave off a faint smell of rotten eggs. It was said that according to the strength and potential of the person who consumed it, each fruit could increase one's strength by 100 to 200 kilograms. The higher the strength, the less the increase. The greater the physical potential, the more the increase. The 3 fruits increased his strength by 150 kilograms, which made Rinpoche understand that he deserved to be a tall, rich, and handsome magician. As a result, the Empress asked someone to design a series of programs to nourish his body and increase its potential. After all, although many medicines wouldn't increase his strength, they could nourish the body and increase its potential. However, after eating these 3 earth fruits, Rinpoche's practice of the 10 ultimate manuals sped up a little. The earth spirit people have all left the barrier between the 2 worlds. These fellows are really a scourge. Wherever they go there are no rats or grass left. Rinpoche clicked his tongue as he looked at the pictures that were transmitted back to him. Everything had been eaten. Fortunately, these foreign races were strong and they had brought some special food with them. 1 grain was enough to last them for a day. If it were an ordinary army, they would starve to death on the way, not to mention being harassed by ferocious beasts. However, there are also benefits. The Protectorate of the South can advance along the route that the Earth Spirit people took. All the ferocious beasts along the way have been cleared. Inform the Protectorate of the South that they can mobilize the army and rebuild the forward operating camp at the barrier between the two worlds. Their food is full of vitality, which is why one grain can last for a day. This is something we can't do. We can only transport large amounts of supplies to the barrier by plane. However, the areas that have been cleared by the Earth Spirit people will soon be occupied by new flying beasts. Because the flying beasts have a large range of activity and have no natural enemies, they will quickly move to this area. Even if there is no food, it will become their territory. In this way, a large number of troops will be needed to clear the flying beasts near this long supply line, Rinpoche said. This was a difficult problem. To clear such a long supply line, not only would a large number of experts be needed, but they would also need more supplies, which would put more pressure on the logistics. What do you think? The Empress looked at him. Expand the army and increase taxes, Rinpoche said after some thought. After all, it took money to support an army and logistics supplies. Although there were many ways for the imperial court to earn money, the Aboriginal army ate too much. The cost of maintaining an Aboriginal army of 100,000 soldiers was equivalent to maintaining an ordinary army of at least 500,000. At present, there were more than 150,000 Aboriginal soldiers, which was equivalent to an army of 750,000. In addition, it was difficult to resupply in the 60,000 mountains, and the annual military expenditure was much higher than that of a million-strong army. One had to know that there were more than 10 million Aboriginals, and the people of the Yun Nation and the Jing tribe only had about 100 million people. With the productivity of this era, 100 million people supporting a million-strong army could be considered a militaristic act. Moreover, if they wanted to expand the army again and maintain this supply line, they would need a large number of soldiers. Upon hearing this, the Empress frowned. Rinpoche then said something else, which made her frown relax a little. However, the additional taxes can be made up by the Qin Nation, Great Xia, and the Imperial Court. It can also be called tributes. The Imperial Court was the country established by the Revolutionary Army that Su Qing was in, and it was opposite Great Xia across the river. The Empress immediately made a decision after hearing this. Whether they agreed or not wasn't important. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Chapter 1234. Something big had happened in the capital of the Qin Nation recently. It was a top priority for the upper echelons and aristocrats of the Qin Nation. The Princess of Dayo was sent to the Qin Nation as an envoy. Women in this world didn't have much status. Apart from marriage, it was unheard of for a princess to go on a diplomatic mission. However, with the presence of the Empress and the fact that the Empress only had one son, even though it was strange for a princess to go on a diplomatic mission, it wasn't unacceptable. Furthermore, it wasn't a secret that the princess was one of the top experts in the world. She was born with the strength of an earth wheel expert. She was only 17 years old, but she was already a cardinal heaven expert, which was equivalent to a spirit wheel expert. She would be one of the top experts in any country and could even meet the king. Coupled with her status as a princess and the strength of Dayo, it went without saying that the Qin Nation attached great importance to this. The commoners probably didn't have much to do with it, and most of them didn't even care. All they thought about every day was how to fill their stomachs. Most people didn't leave a radius of 150 kilometers from birth to death, so they naturally didn't know anything about Dayo. Of course, it wasn't that they didn't know anything. At least, the various utensils that Dayo sold were very expensive, such as mirrors, glass, porcelain, spices, clocks, and cars. Although it was rare, cars could still be seen in the capital of the Qin Nation. Nothing represented the status of the rich and the aristocrats better than these things. Unlike the ordinary people in Dayo who could drive tractors everywhere, the high cost of sending caravans to buy diesel and transport it back made it difficult for anyone except the truly rich to afford it. However, it was precisely because of this that cars were more sought after. The rarer something was, the better it was. Only the rarest and most expensive cars were the best. Moreover, a trip with these things would at least attract a lot of attention. As a result, Dayo, which originally gave people the impression of being barren and poor, was now synonymous with mystery and power in the eyes of many. This was especially true for the upper echelons of the Qin Nation, who really understood the situation abroad. In addition to envy and awe of Dayo's power, there were all kinds of indescribable feelings in their hearts. 20 years ago, Dayo was indeed poor. They didn't have sharp weapons, exquisite silk, or anything beautiful. They only relied on a group of unruly people who committed murder, arson, and robbery, which made the Qin nation, the Yun nation, and Great Xia look down on them. However, with the emergence of one person, the development of Dayo over the past 20 years had been advancing in a tyrannical manner. All kinds of exquisite items, all kinds of wonderful products that people couldn't stop praising, came out of the desert of that civilization. Telephones that could communicate thousands of miles away, lifelike street projections, ironclad warships on the water, and even giant steel eagles that could fly in the sky. Today the Yun nation had perished and was turned into the Yun residence by Dayo. Great Xia was split into two and could no longer take care of Dayo. The state of Qin shrank in a corner, burying its head in the soil. On the surface, it was singing and dancing to celebrate peace, but behind the scenes, it was unknown how many knowledgeable people were unable to sleep. On this day, the white-haired prime minister of the state of Qin went 5 kilometers outside the city to welcome them. Although in the eyes of many people, this was destroying their prestige, this proposal was opposed by many people as soon as it was put forward. This was especially true for the arrogant Qin nobles who indulged in pleasure. Mu Wu shook his head and sighed inwardly as he recalled the words of those people in the hall. Some people hadn't opened their eyes to take a good look at the world for a long time. At this point they could already see the troops coming from afar. The people of the Yun nation were at the front and back, and the Jianlong army was at the northwest to avoid colliding with them. In the middle was the group of envoys, which included 500 guards and some attendants. Although there were only 500 of them, they were the most powerful force under the Empress, the winged cavalry. Every one of them was at the earthwheel level. Even though there were only 500 of them, they could contend with 5,000 people or even more. No one dared to underestimate them. The troops stopped in front of them, and the Jianlong army in front of them spread out and entered the city from the sides. The middle army slowly stopped, and Mu Wu sent someone to report their identity in a very humble manner. After a while, they saw a young lady sitting on a horse, trying her best to look dignified and serious. Although Honeysuckle tried her best to look dignified and serious, her eyes were wandering and unconsciously looking at everything that she found interesting, except for the group of people in front of her and the old man. Why did I come here? What does this have to do with me? Honeysuckle couldn't help but think of this question. She had no interest in the affairs of the imperial court at all. She just loved to play. She relied on her fists to recruit sons everywhere. She recruited monks, Taoist nuns, experts with bad connections, and murderers to form a band. She was even preparing to shoot a movie. However, as soon as she brought up this idea, her father, doubtfully, kicked her to this barren country that had no sense of existence. Honeysuckle was daydreaming and simply didn't pay attention to what the old man in front of her said. She continued until someone coughed heavily behind her. Mu Wu. Greetings, Princess of Dayo. Mu Wu repeated as if nothing had happened, and then introduced the officials around him. Princess, you must have had a long journey. Why don't you follow me into the city and rest for a day? In fact, Mu Wu came to see who the main envoy was. He wanted to invite the other party into the carriage for a chat and sound out the other party's intentions. However, at this moment the others were behind this princess. It seemed that this princess was the one in charge, so it wasn't appropriate to rashly invite her. He wasn't afraid of an old man inviting a young lady into the carriage for a chat. It seemed that it was easier to get information out of that person, but he was afraid that the 500 winged cavalry warriors would chop him up. Don't think that they couldn't do it. The barbarians of Dayo were famous for not playing their cards according to common sense and for turning hostile and chopping people up at any time. More than 10 years ago, being sent to Dayo as an envoy every year was almost a matter of life and death. It was only because the Empress lived in seclusion and cultivated her character that the number of envoys killed over the past 10 years didn't exceed 3. Mu Wu came out of the city to welcome the princess and the Jianlong army entered the city. Everyone naturally knew that the princess had arrived. Many people in the city waited anxiously by the roadside and got what they wished for. They saw the naive and unaffected princess of Dayo sitting on the back of a horse and looking around curiously. There were also hundreds of ferocious-looking bald men who were covered in blood looking around with threatening gazes. Honeysuckle was a little disappointed along the way into the city. The capital of the Qin nation looked lackluster. In terms of extravagance, it was much worse than Wangjing. In terms of grandeur, it was far inferior to the imperial capital. However, when they arrived at the Ministry of Rites, Honeysuckle was still full of energy and wanted to go out for a stroll. However, he was stopped by someone. After all, he was on a diplomatic mission and couldn't go out and cause trouble the moment he landed. Fortunately, he could look forward to the state banquet that night. Qin Ziong from the Qin family of Jiangnan pays his respects to the Princess of Deyo. Just as he arrived at the entrance of the palace, he unexpectedly met a nobleman with a powdered face who thought he was good. Honeysuckle blinked his eyes and looked at Qin Ziong, who was gorgeously dressed like a peacock spreading its tail. Bright and clear like the light clouds covering the moon, fluttering like the flowing snow in the returning wind. This poem is most suitable to describe your highness, Qin Ziong recited leisurely. He then shook his head and recited, round and round, glossy and jade-like. Full of words, breath like orchids. Gorgeous and graceful, makes me forget to eat. One had to know that the husband of the Empress wasn't a citizen of Deyo and was weak and powerless. With this precedent, it was unknown how many noblemen wanted to win the princess's smile. The first to appear was naturally the strongest. Honeysuckle continued to blink his eyes and looked at the peacock in front of him while reciting the poem and hitting his palm with his fan. After pondering for a long time and being influenced by various books and movies on Earth, he finally understood one thing. This guy wants to flirt with me? Honeysuckle, who realized the other party's intention, widened his eyes. Should he follow the usual practice and beat him up or scold him before beating him up? Damn it, shameless. Many people who were watching from afar cursed in their hearts. Qin Ziong saw that Honeysuckle's expression had a reaction and was delighted. He thought to himself that this guy was indeed from the barbarian lands. Just reciting a few lines of poetry was enough to make the other party lose control. Then everything went black. As if he was hit by a hammer, his head swung back heavily and his entire body flew out. First set a small goal, for example 1 second. Remember, scholar's residence. Chapter 1235. Hua had held back a little. Otherwise this punch would have blown his head off. Even so, there was chaos in front of the palace. Qin Ziang's status in the Qin nation wasn't low. He was the first one to speak to Hua. The Qin family of Jiangnan was a big family in the Qin nation, which could be seen from their surname. Even though they weren't royalty, they had a close relationship with the royal family. The most favored son of the Qin family was punched unconscious in front of the palace. The faces of the people in front of the palace turned pale, and many of them drew their weapons. How dare you draw your weapons against me? Hua wanted to say that he was flirting with her, but when she saw the actions of the people, her expression changed. The Empress's phoenix eyes narrowed, and a cold glint flashed in her eyes. All of you stop, all of you stop. A golden-armored general rushed over and checked on Qin Ziang's condition before cupping his fists and saying to Hua, I wonder if the Qin nation did not treat the princess well, or did I offend the princess? Why is the princess so ruthless? Do I need to explain to you? Hua said unhappily. In Deyo, who dared to draw their weapons against her? How dare you ask me for an explanation now? Deyo, Earth, the princess, a student with a hidden identity and a bunch of sons. Hua's unique experiences had also created her unique character and way of life. Even though she was naive, lively, and playful, she knew what she represented now. Her face darkened because of her power. Be it her identity or her strength, no one dared to act rashly. The veins on the golden-armored general's neck were bulging. There was nothing more sullen than this. I will report this to Her Majesty and the other officials. In fact, there was no need for him to say anything. Someone had already gone in to report. The people who were sitting and chatting in the hall immediately went into an uproar. Then the entire hall quieted down as everyone looked at someone in the hall. Even those who didn't know what happened in the distance lowered their voices. Say it again. Why did the princess hit him? Qin Danqing, the head of the Qin family and the Minister of Revenue, was able to suppress the anger in his heart when he heard this news. His expression did not change as he asked in a deep voice. Young Master Qin recited 2 poems, both of which were words of praise. There were no other actions. The person who came said the names of the poems. Everyone was a little suspicious. These 2 poems did not disrespect the other party, so how did things turn out like this? Simply unbridled and lawless. This is the Qin nation, not Deyo. The head of the Qin clan, the Minister of Revenue, Qin Danqing, said in a deep voice, Since Ziong is innocent, then His Highness must give us an explanation for his rudeness. As she spoke, Qin Danqing took in everyone's expressions and shut her mouth. On the other hand, many of the officials who were trying to curry favor with the Qin clan looked furious, as if they had been greatly insulted. When the emperor of the state of Qin arrived, a man in his 30s with a white face and a long beard, who looked rather elegant, let 2 flowers into the palace. After a while, Hua strode into the hall. He glanced at everyone present and cupped his fists at the head of the table. Qi Yuqing greets the Emperor of the Qin nation. Take a seat, Princess. Emperor Qin said. Hua didn't have a title. Dao only had one princess, and if nothing went wrong she would be the next empress. Therefore, she was led to the head of the table, which was second only to the emperor and equal to the prime minister. Many people in the hall looked at Qin Danqing. He had been resting with his eyes closed and didn't say a word. After Hua sat down, Qin Danqing started to make things difficult. Your Majesty, before the banquet starts, I have something to say. Everyone's eyes flashed. Oh, please speak. Emperor Qin's eyes flashed and he had a gentle smile on his face. Qin Danqing strode to the center of the hall, waved his sleeves, cupped his fists, and turned to Hua. Just now, Qin Xiang, a disciple of the Qin clan, offended the princess of Dao and was punished lightly. I wonder if the princess can explain to me. The Qin clan doesn't discipline their disciples verbally, so I will definitely discipline them strictly when I return. Not only did he explain the matter clearly, he did not put himself in a high position. He even left a way out for himself. He said that he would go back to teach his disciple a lesson, but if Second Flower could not give a reason, it would be his turn to make things difficult for him. In terms of words, Hua was no match for this old fox. Something like this happened? Emperor Qin didn't change his smile. He didn't wait for Hua to speak. I wonder how Xiang is doing? Dao and Qin have different customs. Maybe he offended you unintentionally. Qin Danqing's face didn't change. He slightly lowered his head and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. Hua rolled her eyes. She had read about the Qin nation before she came. The current emperor was only 12 years old when he ascended the throne. When the late emperor was seriously ill, he set up a cabinet to assist him. There were 3 scholars in the cabinet to support the young emperor. However, to prevent the cabinet from influencing the court, the late emperor held the power in the 6 ministries. Nominally, the 3 schools were higher than the 6 ministries, but in reality the 6 ministries held most of the power. Therefore, the court of the Qin nation was very chaotic. Now that the emperor was in the prime of his life, he wanted to reclaim the throne, but he was in constant conflict with many ministers and aristocratic families. It could be seen from the current situation in the court. Although his father and Empress mother were prepared to beat up the Qin nation from top to bottom before making them listen to them obediently, now it seemed like they could support one group at a time and beat the other. There were many such situations in history books. Supporting the emperor and suppressing the nobles and ministers was the best option. After all, the emperor was the legitimate emperor and was in the same line as his family. Hua's interest was piqued as these thoughts popped up in her mind. Well, on second thought, it could be summarized as killing the chicken to warn the monkey. The emperor was the monkey. Hua helped him kill the chicken, so he would definitely repay her kindness. He wouldn't refuse or dare to object to her intentions. Anyway, there was no one in the Qin nation who could fight. Thinking of this, Hua's face turned cold. She put on an arrogant posture and said, "He's your son? No wonder he was so rude. His saliva flew everywhere when he spoke and he almost sprayed it on me. I can assume that he was deliberately humiliating me. Is this your family's plan?" Nonsense. Qin Danqing's face turned green. His saliva flew everywhere when he spoke? That was dementia. If these words were to spread, Qin Xiang's reputation would be tarnished. Are you saying that I'm babbling nonsense? Hua frowned and pressed one hand under the table. He wondered if he should flip the table to show his anger. After pondering for a second, the table flew out. Duong. If Qin Danqing wasn't good at martial arts, the table would have hit his face. How dare you? Everyone heard Hua's sweet voice before the guards in the main hall shouted. However, they didn't have time to admire how soft and delicate her voice was. Their faces twitched. She flipped the table with just 2 sentences? She was indeed the princess of Dao. How dare you be so rude in the palace of the Qin nation? Qin Danqing was so angry that his beard curled up. How dare you say that the princess of Dao is babbling nonsense? Hua was even angrier than Qin Danqing. I didn't? Then you are babbling nonsense with the intention of framing me? Nonsense. You still want to say that the princess of Dao is babbling nonsense? No matter what, Qin Danqing was a scholar. He had never been in such a bad fight. Everyone looked at Qin Danqing, who went from an old fox to a woman's quarreling mode in the blink of an eye. Qin Danqing's face was covered in dirt and her face was red from Honeysuckle's rich experience. They were at a loss. Although the current behavior of Princess Wuyang was not in line with their understanding of princesses and envoys. But the current scene was very familiar and intimate. It was in line with their understanding of women. First, set a small goal, for example, 1 second. Chapter 1236. Qin Danqing almost vomited blood and died from Erhua's tiger-like, "You're cold, heartless and unreasonable." He never thought that he would be in such a situation. He never thought that a princess would actually quarrel with someone. Furthermore, it was during a banquet for her when she was on a diplomatic mission to another country. He felt that his head was going to explode. However, he finally understood one thing. No matter what, he had lost. What would happen if he quarreled with a teenage girl? He didn't know about Erhua's experience. Erhua had been beating people up since he was young. He had beaten up more people than Qin Danqing knew. Many of them were stubborn and cursed at the same time. Although Erhua used his fists more than his mouth, if he really wanted to curse, he could write a cursing dictionary. If not for the fact that he had been beaten up by the Empress and Rinpoche for cursing, she would have made this old man doubt his life. Although Qin Danqing didn't know about this, he also had the intention to retreat. No matter what the other party's identity was, it couldn't change the fact that she was a teenage girl. Not only was she of high status, but she was also very good at fighting. Finally, he threw out a sentence and was about to leave. He didn't even give face to the Empress. However, how could Erhua let him leave just like that? Before he could take 3 steps, he appeared behind him like the wind and kicked his waist. Everyone could hear the sound of bones breaking. Qin Danqing didn't even have time to groan before he was sent flying. Standing there with his right leg in a kicking position, Erhua was deep in thought. Should he let him call me daddy? It didn't seem complete if he didn't say it after beating someone up. Fortunately, Erhua didn't have obsessive-compulsive disorder and eventually gave up on this idea. However, the hall was in an uproar. Even those who didn't like Qin Danqing didn't look too good at this moment. Quarreling in the hall and beating up an important official of the country was simply unimaginable and unreasonable. The officials of the Qin nation were most surprised by Princess Wuyang's temperament. She didn't seem like a princess at all. However, no princess was like Erhua, who was mischievous and got beaten up every day. Coupled with a mother like the Empress, Erhua's character was very unique. She was domineering, tough, flamboyant, and unscrupulous in a way that ordinary girls didn't have. Honeysuckle looked around as if she was looking at a bunch of country bumpkins when she heard the commotion around her. She had a faint smile on her face. In her heart, they were indeed a bunch of country bumpkins. That was why they were in such a mess. If you were in Dayo's imperial court, you bunch of weaklings wouldn't even survive the first day. What was the big deal about beating up an important minister? In Dayo's imperial court, people's brains were beaten into a pulp every day. There was even a row of bricks placed under the Empress's chair. What's going on? The only problem was, they were in the Qin Kingdom's royal palace, and the ones they were fighting were the officials of the Qin Kingdom. But it didn't matter. Are you going to bite me? I'm not here to make friends. I don't need you to like me. I just need you to respect me and be afraid of me. As for these two, they could be obtained with one's fists. On the other hand, Emperor Qin looked at the chaotic hall below expressionlessly. He memorized everyone's expressions, but no one knew what he was thinking. Silence. After a few minutes, someone stood up and spoke, suppressing the chaotic situation. Princess Wuyang? Mu Wu was interrupted by Emperor Qin. The customs of Dayo and the Qin nation are different. There are some misunderstandings on both sides. Princess Wuyang may have been impulsive, and Sir Chen's words and actions are somewhat inappropriate. It's inappropriate for him to leave early. We'll talk about this later. My dear officials, please take your seats. Someone escorted Sir Chen back to his residence and summoned the imperial physician to accompany him. All the herbs will be taken from the palace treasury. Princess Wuyang, please take a seat and join us. Qin Danqing was carried away. The palace banquet seemed to be uneventful on the surface, but everyone was silent and had their own thoughts. Your Majesty, isn't this inappropriate? If we rely on the power of others, I'm afraid we'll be inviting a wolf into the house. After the palace banquet, somewhere in the palace, Mu Wu was slightly hesitant. What's inappropriate? Just give them what they want. I'm just afraid they won't want it. With Dayo's current strength and the Qin nation's current situation, if Dayo sends troops to invade, will we be able to stop them? Not to mention the others, just the Empress alone was enough to stop her. Dayo's mind isn't necessarily on expanding its territory. You've heard of that rumor, right? All these years, Dayo's resources have been sent to the depths of the 60,000 mountains. It's said that there are some foreign races there, and the top experts who disappeared are fighting with them. This is only a rumor, and we don't know whether it's true or not. now that the power in the imperial court has fallen, how many people listen to me, the emperor? How many of my edicts can be disseminated? Is the Qin nation still under the control of the imperial court? Since that's the case, it's better to rely on external forces to regain power. After that, I'll be able to issue political orders, clean up the aristocratic families, and fill the national treasury. As long as they give me what I want, I'll give them what they want. If that's the case, I'm afraid those aristocratic families will be forced into a corner and might rebel. Although Princess Wuyang is strong, she only has 500 servants. Even if she's willing, she might not be able to protect you. Isn't that simple? Cut off one of their arms first. Coincidentally, Qin Danqing has a conflict with Qi Yuqing. As long as we can destroy the Qin family, we'll cut off one of their arms. Aren't there a few good-for-nothings in the Qin family? After Qin Danqing is injured by Qi Yuqing, we can find someone to provoke them. Those good-for-nothings are used to being domineering, and they will recklessly run over to provoke her. In that case, I'll hand my sword over to her. As long as she takes this opportunity to destroy the Qin family in a thunderous manner, the other families will definitely be frightened and won't dare to act rashly. In this way we can take back the 5,000 soldiers of the left guard. With the left guard restraining the right guard, they won't have a chance to do anything. This old subject understands. Go and see Princess Wuyang directly. As long as she agrees, I'll agree to all her conditions, even if the Qin nation becomes a vassal state of Dayo. Soon after Hua returned to his residence, someone came to visit him. It was Mu Wu, the first minister. After hearing the other party's intentions, Hua actually hit it off with him. He felt that it wasn't easy for him to use his brain, lest his father always said that his brain was full of muscles. However, the result was no different from not using his brain at all. Even if he didn't do anything, the other party would still find him. The only thing he gained was that he already had a target. Hua didn't use her brain much. Most of the time, she just needed to extend her hand and people would call her father. Although she was already in high school, this was mainly because she spent twice the time studying and had the skills of a Cardinal Heaven expert. In fact, the former wasn't that important. The latter was the main reason why she could successfully enter high school. After sending Mu Wu off, Hua thought about it and didn't look for anyone to discuss with. There was no one in the team who was smarter than him. As for calling her father, it wasn't necessary. The small Qin nation wouldn't be able to cause any trouble no matter what. The next morning, when she was sitting at her table eating breakfast, she heard people shouting and cursing at the door. They wanted to rush in. However, when she rushed to the door to have some fun, she realized that it was already over. More than 10 people were lying in disorder at the door. All of their bones were broken and they were only left with one breath. Who are they? Hua raised her chin. Among them, there were 2 people who looked like young masters from their clothes. Their faces were smeared with blood that they had vomited. I don't know. The 2 winged cavalry warriors who were guarding the door had simple and honest smiles on their faces. Who cared? In any case, they just had to fight. Go and ask. Chapter 1237. The Qin family? Honeysuckle crossed her arms. They beat up the old one last night, and now someone dared to come looking for trouble? Who gave them the courage? Honeysuckle felt like laughing. If they had stayed at home, she would have had to find an excuse to cause trouble. There was no need to find an excuse. Honeysuckle immediately shouted into the room, "Someone is here. Someone is fighting their way to the door." Her voice was filled with eagerness. As soon as she shouted, there was a commotion in the yard. Hundreds of figures rushed out. Where? They couldn't hide the smile on their faces. It was as if they were waiting for a delivery on Double 11 and were ready to open it. Or perhaps they were so hungry that they couldn't help but stare at their own fingers. Finally, their own takeout arrived. Come with 100 people. Bring them and follow me. Remember to handle them with care. They are fragile now. Honeysuckle pointed at the dozens of people outside. Look, this quantifier can describe their current state very well. The people behind Honeysuckle looked at each other and started an intense game of rock, paper, scissors with tacit understanding. Rock, scissors, paper. One of them punched him while the other slapped him against the wall. I'm paper, you're rock. I win. That person laughed proudly. It was a spectacular sight to see hundreds of people playing rock, paper, scissors. Their movements were a bit big. Some of the guys' eyes were red from being stabbed by the scissors. Those who poked at others were idiots. After all, most people preferred to give out stones. Paper was the most suitable. Not only could they win, they could also slap people. Hurry up. Honeysuckle leaned against the door and couldn't help but urge them. She was afraid that the Qin family would come over and kneel in front of her. Honeysuckle was a little girl. She could be persuaded but not cowed. She was also thin-skinned. If the other party really kneeled, she would be too embarrassed to do anything. Fortunately, the thing she was most worried about didn't happen. These guys seemed to have snuck over on their own. They lay at the door and didn't show up until now. This place was next to the Ministry of Rights. There wasn't even a commoner around. Such a big thing happened, but no one from the Ministry of Rights showed up. It was as if they didn't know. Your Majesty, Princess Wuyang has set off. Emperor Chen's ears twitched as he was writing. This news had relieved him of a lot of pressure recently. If everything went smoothly, he would soon be able to take back his power and become the true emperor. However, he quickly calmed down from the excitement in his heart. Even though the handwriting had been dyed with ink, he still finished writing the rest of it. Only then did he crumple the handwriting into a ball and throw it into the pile of waste paper. Emperor Qin turned around and sighed. A few good-for-nothings even dared to offend the Princess of Dayo. From this, we can see how bold the Qin family is. The Qin family of Jiangnan has been in the limelight for too long. It's not just those good-for-nothings. Isn't Lord Qin Danqing the same? That Qin Xiang is his son. It was Qin Danqing's idea to get close to Princess Martial Yang. He really doesn't know how to spell the word death for having thoughts about Princess Martial Yang. Mu said. With the Qin family's great reputation, Erhua knew the way just by grabbing a random person on the street. Before the two guards could speak, their faces were pressed into the stone slabs. Even if they survived, they probably wouldn't have the face to see anyone for the rest of their lives. Honeysuckle kicked open the door and led the others in. Everyone inside, get out now. That Qi Yuqing is too domineering. She's going too far. Ancestor, we can't let this matter go. In a hall of the Qin family, a few people were talking. In the seat of honor was an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion. He was the Qin family's biggest reliance. The status of the Qin family wasn't just because they had produced 7 or 8 empresses over the past few hundred years or because they had produced 10 rank 3 officials. It was also because they had always had a spirit wheel expert in charge. Even in Great Xia, a family that had a spirit wheel expert in charge for hundreds of years was enough to become the top family, not to mention the Qin state, which was located in a remote corner. When Qin Danqing was carried back last night, the Qin family immediately exploded. Although it was not difficult to deal with injuries such as a fractured lumbar spine and shattered pelvis in this world, the family head had almost been crippled. How could the Qin family, which had been one of the most powerful families in the Qin country for hundreds of years, swallow this insult? However, Dayo rose to prominence 20 years ago. Today it was powerful and had many experts. The group of people quarreled for half a night without any results. Today the ancestor appeared, but he didn't say a word and let the people below him quarrel. At this moment, everyone heard the clear voice of a young girl coming from outside. Everyone inside, get out now. The ancestor of the Qin family, Qin Dang, frowned, got up and walked out. Let's go out and take a look. After passing through the courtyard, he saw a lot of people lying on the ground. Most of them were twisted in strange positions. It looked like there weren't many bones in their bodies that were intact. If it weren't for the slight rise and fall of their chests, they would look more like corpses. In the middle of the courtyard stood a young girl who was about 16 or 17 years old. She was dressed in a blue dress, had a delicate face, and had a cold expression on her face. In addition, there were hundreds of bear-like burly men with a strong smell of blood on their bodies. She could tell the origin of these people at a glance. Princess Wuyang, some people behind Qin Dang exclaimed. Princess Wuyang, what's the meaning of this? Qin Dang ignored the others and asked in a deep voice with a gloomy face. A few good-for-nothings actually dared to find trouble with me, Erhua said coldly. She tilted her head and asked, what did they do just now? She really didn't know. Those two guys were a little disrespectful to Her Highness. They ran to the door and said, get that slut Qi Yuqing out, a winged cavalry warrior said as he pointed at the two people on the ground. Honeysuckle widened his eyes and kicked the burly bearman out of the door. She had a look of disbelief on her face and said, they actually dared to scold me? They are actually still alive? As soon as Erhua finished speaking, a group of black figures instantly dashed out and smashed heavily on the ground. 5 or 6 people stepped on the 2 human figures on the ground at the same time. Immediately the human figures disappeared and became meat paste. Stop. Xiao Wu Xiao Qi. Someone behind Qin Dang shouted. Qin Dang's face turned ugly, and his heart turned even colder. How dare the Qin family? Honeysuckle sneered. Princess Wuyang, we still don't know the truth of what happened just now. You killed a direct descendant of the Qin family just because of a sentence from someone else? Yesterday you even injured the head of the Qin family in Xinjiang. This is simply intolerable. This is the Qin nation, not Dayo. Aren't you afraid of a war between the two nations? The Qin family will definitely report this matter to the higher-ups and definitely won't let this matter go, someone behind Qin Deng shouted. Hua looked at the group of people opposite her. Most of them actually agreed with what she said, which made her feel like laughing. Hua shook her head slightly and said, "You are the frogs at the bottom of the well. You are used to being domineering in the Qin nation. Do you really think that everyone will follow your rules? I thought that the two nouveau riches from the Qin family were stupid enough to come and scold me. I didn't expect you guys to be equally stupid. You are just a bunch of useless people. Do you really think that I will reason with you guys honestly? When I was young, my father told me that the one with the bigger fist is the reason. Only when both parties are equal will there be reason. Will you reason with people when you bully the commoners and confiscate the businesses of the merchants? What gives you the illusion that you are qualified to reason with me? The Qin family? What a joke." Hua looked at the crowd coldly, waved her hand and said in a clear and soft voice, "Kill them all." The Qin nation had been peaceful for 20 years because Rinba Qin found it tiring and troublesome and didn't want to expand his territory. There were only a few spirit wheel experts, and if he wanted to, he could kill them with a flip of his palm. If the Qin nation was like this, it was needless to mention a family from the Qin nation. Moreover, this was a request from the Qin emperor. Even in death, the Qin family couldn't believe that the princess of Dayo actually found an excuse and dared to kill her way into the residence of a rank 3 official in the Qin nation. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Chapter 1238. When a princess of a country went on a diplomatic mission from another country, she slaughtered the entire clan of that country. Who had ever heard of such a thing? The entire Qin nation was in an uproar. Many rich and powerful nobles were red-eyed. This wasn't going too far. This was simply treating them like livestock raised by their own family. Just as everyone was shocked by this news and wondering what to do next, the reaction of the Qin nation's imperial family poured a bucket of cold water over everyone's heads. After the extermination of the Qin family, the imperial family immediately sent people to arrest Zhuo Wei and severely listed the crimes of the Qin family. This made everyone immediately understand one thing. The imperial family and Dayo's Princess Wuyang were in cahoots. The emperor, who had been arrested, was no longer willing to lose his power. He would rather invite a wolf into his house and bite off a piece of meat from the aristocratic families. Rinba Qin was very clear about what happened in the Qin nation. He didn't really care, even though it sounded quite exaggerated. A princess exterminating the aristocratic families in the Qin nation. In fact, Dayo wasn't on the same level as the Qin nation. When the Empress was in cardinal heaven, it would be troublesome if she was surrounded by an army. But now the Empress alone could flatten the capital of the Qin nation. A few longevity heaven experts could pacify a nation. This was a gap brought about by pure strength. With such a huge gap in strength, it didn't matter what Hua did. This time, Hua was sent on a diplomatic mission to let her see more people and things and train herself. Rinba Qin didn't know what she would gain. In any case, it was now a matter of using fists to solve problems. Hua was very similar to the Empress in this aspect. She always liked to use force to solve problems and was used to using force no matter what. If it was in a peaceful environment, it wouldn't be suitable. But now, the problems that the human race faced had to be solved with force. Other than force, it was one's own business. He wasn't worried about Hua's safety. In fact, there was another expert in that team, Jupu Hua, who was an expert from longevity heaven. Although she was also very violent, she didn't like to stir up trouble as much as the others. He strolled back to the main hall. While he was still outside, he heard banging sounds on the table. The Empress was sitting on a chair and reading memorials. She was going crazy. Rinba Qin wasn't surprised. He knew what kind of people those officials were. He had been tortured by them for more than 10 years. Rinba Qin walked to the side of the table and picked up a memorial that the Empress had slapped aside. He looked at the words written on it. Your Majesty, turtle-backed bamboo, a specialty of Yonglai. It's very delicious, soft and sweet. There was also a comment from the Empress at the bottom. Don't send any more turtle-backed bamboos. Lu Jing again. With one look, Rinba Qin knew who it was. Before the Empress came back, this guy spent half of the year promoting the specialty of their country, the turtle-backed bamboo. The first time he saw it, it was a novelty. After all, the bamboo shoots looked quite strange. 3 days later, he once again received a memorial. Your Highness, enclosed with this letter is the local specialty of turtle-backed bamboo. It's very delicious. He replied, I don't really like it. You don't have to send it to me next time. In the end, when the other party submitted another memorial, it said, Your Highness, I have brought you the turtle-backed bamboo. It's very delicious. King told you not to give me this, didn't I? After being scolded by Rinpoche, now that the Empress was back, he was recommending turtle-backed bamboo again. This definitely wasn't the first time the Empress had received a letter. It seemed like the Empress was annoyed by him. The Empress held a stack of memorials in her hands for 3 minutes before throwing it to Rinpoche impatiently. The 8,000 words in this letter were all nonsense. The only valuable thing was the last sentence. Is your Majesty well? Rinpoche was very experienced. After reading the first sentence, he skipped the middle and looked at the last sentence. He casually wrote, Very well. Recently I have gained weight by 1 kilogram. Then the third letter said, It rained heavily in Dongning today. The rain was very heavy, but the temperature was very comfortable. I was also very happy to bathe in the rain. Rinpoche had a deep impression of the owner of this memorial. Half of his memorials this year were about the rain and the other half were about the scorching sun. The Empress's comment was, It's the rainy season now. It rains every day. I know. Then the fourth letter said, Recently, it has been raining every day. The fish in the pond are almost drowning. Which one is better to cook or roast? Which one does your Majesty prefer? The Empress said, I don't like any of them. The fifth letter said, Lu Jian has rebelled and declared himself the emperor. He has more than a dozen soldiers and ministers under him. This happened last year and I have already killed them all. I suddenly remembered that I haven't informed your Majesty yet when I was brushing my teeth today. The Empress asked, Who is Lu Jian? What else have you not told me? The sixth letter said, The rain is so heavy, your Majesty. It's as heavy as the day I left the capital. Can I go back? The Empress said, You will stay there for the rest of your life. After casually going through a memorial, the Empress screamed, Ah! She pushed the memorials aside, got up and stuffed Rinpoche into a chair. Come over, my stomach hurts. Rinpoche smiled helplessly. Going through memorials every day was indeed very frustrating, especially those that were retarded. After sitting in this position for a long time, he would encounter all kinds of weird memorials. In particular, there were a few foreign officials who were already on Rinpoche's list. If there wasn't any major event like the sky falling down, their memorials would never reach Rinpoche. This was also why the Empress had been working very hard in the palace recently and had to go through all the memorials every day. However, it seemed like the Empress's patience had reached its limit. Rinpoche saw that the Empress hadn't left and was lying on another recliner. Rinpoche looked through the memorials and conveniently mentioned the Qin nation's matter. Oh, the Empress responded, indicating that she understood. For the people of the Qin nation this was a huge matter, but for the Empress, it was no different from those retarded memorials just now. She completely ignored it. She then turned on the smart device on her wrist and projected a TV series. Within a few minutes, Rinpoche started to get upset. Looking at the memorials that were still half a meter tall, Rinpoche said helplessly, Your Majesty, can you not cause trouble even if you don't want to work? In order to distinguish them from other letters, the memorials were specially made. They had hard covers on both sides and were folded in the middle. There were at least 40 to 50 memorials that were half a meter tall. The Empress rolled her eyes at Rinpoche and swayed her body as she went out to find a garden to bask in the sun. The annihilation of the Qin family by Duo Hua was only the beginning, not the end. The Emperor of Qin took a swift and decisive stance. After being suppressed for a long time, he finally seized the opportunity to slash at the aristocratic families and decisively reclaim power. This process naturally wasn't smooth sailing. No matter when, it was inevitable that there would be idiots who would risk their lives for power and wealth. There were even 2 internal rebellions in the Qin nation. Of course, according to what Rinpoche knew, there was a lot of inside information about these 2 rebellions. Some of the people who rebelled died regardless of whether they rebelled or not. During this process, 2 of the so-called 7 top aristocratic families in the Qin nation disappeared in the annals of history besides the Qin family. In fact, these 2 families were even more miserable than the Qin family. Only a portion of the Qin family was annihilated. If the rest were obedient, the Emperor of Qin would spare their lives. However, these 2 families were involved in the rebellions and their entire families were slaughtered. In addition, more than a dozen families, big and small, were completely annihilated. The heads that were strewn all over the ground and the smell of blood that filled the city finally calmed some people down from the brink of madness. On the surface, it seemed that the emperor of Qin nation had gotten what he wanted and finally suppressed those aristocratic families. The Qin nation also expressed its allegiance to Dayo and paid a large tribute every year. However, those aristocratic families were suppressed. Even if they paid a tribute every year, the situation in the Qin nation wouldn't be any worse than before. Just the property confiscated from those exterminated families was enough to support them for more than 10 years. Duo Hua left the Qin nation and headed all the way north to Hoyan and Great Xia. However, the turmoil in the Qin nation still hadn't stopped. It was estimated that it wouldn't stop for a few years. As for the memorials, they actually referred to some memorials from the Kangxi Emperor's era. There were only things that couldn't be imagined, but there was nothing that couldn't be done. In ancient times, there were many memorials from various officials that drove the emperor crazy. First, set a small goal, for example, 1 second. Chapter 1239. Human Emperor. Human Emperor? A man in the hall raised his voice and couldn't hide his surprise. Following this voice, the hall became like a wet market and became chaotic. Silence. Su Qing, who was over 40 years old, had a beard, a golden crown, and a golden robe embroidered with a fierce lion-like beast. He looked calm and dignified if one forgot his surprised expression just now. Do you have any objections to honoring my empress as the human emperor? Lu Hua looked calm and curiously at Su Qing, the emperor of Dayo. After all, he led a group of people to split the originally powerful Great Xia into two. No matter how one looked at it, he could be considered a legend. Princess Wuyang, you'd better be more respectful. A few bearded generals glared at Lu Hua. Lu Hua sneered, ignored the officials and just looked at Su Qing. He slowly continued, honoring Dayo's empress as the human emperor and Dayo as the nation of Dayo is what you should do. Unless you don't know your own strength and want to challenge the majesty of Dayo. Of course, this was all nonsense. Lu Hua knew the whole story best. It didn't matter. In fact, it was just a reason for them to pay tribute every year. Following Lu Hua's words, the originally aggressive crowd suddenly became like ducks being strangled by the neck, and all their voices were strangled. Su Qing gave Lu Hua a strange look. He wasn't like those idiots from the Qin nation. Moreover, he had met Ren Baqian and Qi Zixiao when he was young and had some understanding of them. Moreover, as far as he knew, the center of gravity of these two people was now in the south. After the martial arts competition that year, the existence of foreign races was no longer a secret to some people. Not to mention, the disappearance of so many spirit wheel experts in Great Xia was equivalent to the disappearance of all the super-rich people on Earth. It was very difficult to pretend that they didn't know. Therefore, after the surprise, he immediately felt that there was something wrong. Su Qing chuckled and said with some reminiscence, "Back then, the crops of Dayo saved the lives of many people. Since our uprising, there have been high-yield crops like sweet potatoes and potatoes. Although there was chaos in the past few years, not many people starved to death. Everyone in Dayo is very grateful to you. No matter what, you've saved countless people. What's more, your technology is developing very quickly, and you're starting to make this world completely different from the past few thousand years. You're walking ahead of everyone else. Dayo is currently the most powerful nation in the world, and Qi Zixiao is the most powerful emperor. Furthermore, both of you are doing great things that are worthy of respect. All the countries will respect Qi Zixiao as the human emperor." I agree. Su Qing's words were beautiful. Now that Hua Dou was here, he had already spoken his mind. If Ho Yin dared to reject him, then he could only wait for the battle to begin. Moreover, it was a battle where a bunch of experts descended. It was the kind of battle where adults fought against children. He was well aware of the difference in strength between the two of them. There was no way he could refuse. However, if someone forced Qi Zixiao to be the human emperor, then he would lose a lot of face. His dignity as the emperor of Ho Yen would also be swept to the ground. The common people would look down on him, and the people in the imperial court would inevitably be resentful. However, when this matter came out of Su Qing's mouth, it first became gratitude for Dayo's high-yield food that had saved countless people. Then he praised Dayo's technology for changing the world. Dayo was now the most powerful nation and Qi Zixiao was a top expert. He then pointed out the matter that many people vaguely knew, that Dayo was currently fighting against the foreign races in the south. At this point, there were fewer objections when he mentioned the common respect for the human emperor. In fact, everyone knew that they didn't have a chance to object. They just needed an excuse. At least they could save their face. Su Qing's words saved everyone's face. Even if outsiders found out, Su Qing would have something to say in the future. Most importantly, Su Qing agreed readily, which made Hua Dou feel that he was a good person. At least he was smart and decisive. Hua Dou saw that everyone looked conflicted, but there was no objection. Then he said, "Since we respect the nation, you guys don't have any objections to paying tribute every year, right? 1 billion silver notes every year." This was the main topic. Su Qing's face froze. Silver notes were Dayo's currency. 1 billion silver notes was equivalent to 100 million taels of silver. In the past, Great Xia's annual treasury income was only slightly more than 100 million taels of silver. Even the once prosperous Yin nation's treasury income was only 7,000 to 8,000 taels of silver. Of course, since your nation pays tribute every year, Dayo will also show its appreciation and provide you with some technology and equipment, Hua Dou added. As soon as he said this, everyone's expression changed back to normal. The expressions of all the officials in the imperial court changed back and forth like a lantern. However, everyone felt much more at ease. Dayo had too many technologies that people coveted. If they could provide them with some support, even if they didn't raise taxes, they could use these technologies to set up factories just like Dayo and earn back the money. After hearing this, Su Qing agreed in his heart. He wanted to see what kind of technology could be provided. However, Su Qing felt a little strange and asked, "Is Dayo short of money now?" Over the past decade, Dayo's products had been sold all over the world. From the lowest grade canned food and vermicelli to all kinds of spices, glass, mirrors, cotton products, and some advanced clocks and watches, there were also phones and vehicles. The annual profits from these things could be said to be massive. Furthermore, Dayo's military strength ensured that Dayo's products could enter any country and receive the lowest taxes. Under such circumstances, how could Dayo be short of money? However, the annual tribute of 1 billion taels of silver showed that Dayo was indeed short of money. Otherwise, they wouldn't have resorted to such means. After hearing Hua Dou's words, Su Qing understood that the real highlight was the 1 billion taels of silver. He had studied Rinpochen and Qi Zixiao for many years. If the two of them really loved fame and were really that ambitious, the Qin nation wouldn't still exist. It wasn't impossible for them to swallow Ho Yin and Great Xia together. Wasn't swallowing all the other countries and becoming the greatest emperor in history better than revering the human emperor? Dayo had the strength to do so because there were too many experts in Dayo. Putting himself in Hua Dou's shoes, he definitely wouldn't be able to resist this temptation. However, the other party hadn't made any moves for so many years. Suddenly, they proposed to revere the human emperor and asked all the countries to pay tribute every year. The meaning behind this was clear. It was for money. Could it be that the war with the foreign races is too intense? Su Qing guessed. Hua Dou rolled her eyes. She didn't know what Su Qing was thinking. Even if she knew, she wouldn't be bothered to refute. It had nothing to do with the intensity of the war. The main reason was that the investment was too large. Dayo's army was indeed tyrannical, but it wasn't easy to maintain such a strong army. Furthermore, there were all kinds of studies. More importantly, the investment in infrastructure over the years was the real bulk of the money. In recent years, the infrastructure outside had begun to slow down. However, in a place that others couldn't see, the 60,000 mountains, was the real money-hungry place. To lay a kilometer of railroad tracks in the 60,000 mountains, the cost was more than 10 times that of the outside world. It was a black hole that could only be entered and not exited. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1240. Su Qing is indeed smart. Rinpochen looked at the report in his hand and shook his head with a smile. Did Hua cause any trouble this time? Rinpochen looked up and asked. The princess didn't cause any trouble. The man in black standing below thought for a while and added, she just taught a few people a lesson. 2 of them were the princes of Ho Yin, but the emperor didn't say anything. Rinpochen felt a little strange. Since Su Qing was so smart, his son shouldn't be stupid, right? Tell me about it. A moment later, Rinpochen was deep in thought after listening to the report. The story was very simple. It wasn't that someone was blind enough to provoke Hua, but that there were 2 misunderstandings. Except for the 2 princes who were beaten up a little miserably, the others were fine. The problem was that both of them were misunderstandings. Hua then beat them up, and both of them were pretenses. This was too much of a coincidence. Forget it, it's a coincidence. Rinpochen shook his head and ignored it. After all, it was a small matter that wasn't worth his time. Since Su Qing is so straightforward. Ren Baqin took out a form from the table with the names of some technologies on it. He wanted to draw a part of it for someone to give to Su Qing. These were the technologies that Dayo had given them. Ren Baqin didn't care much about these low-level technologies now. These low-value-added technologies weren't very meaningful. He needed something more advanced, and manpower was always a big problem. Even after working hard for more than a decade and teaching 16 hours a day in the streets and alleys of all the cities, the literacy rate was still not high. The effect of letting adults learn how to read and write all their lives hadn't met expectations. Fortunately, young people nowadays were pretty good. Since the establishment of primary and secondary schools in various cities, and the Yun Nation scholars were sent to be teachers, he could finally see fruitful fruit trees. The only problem was that it wasn't time to harvest them yet. If he had a choice, Ren Baqin hoped that they could go to college instead of being sent to factories after graduating from junior high school. Ren Baqin put this thought aside and picked up the top piece of the list of technologies, which included a series of low-level technologies such as soap, glass, and textiles. After thinking for a while, Ren Baqin picked up another piece of paper with a list of agricultural technologies including animal husbandry, breeding, and farming. Following which, Ren Baqin took out the third piece of paper. On it, there were some techniques related to cement, basic chemical engineering, and smelting. Ren Baqin drew a line under some of them. Su Qing was quite open-minded, and his son didn't provoke anyone. He was beaten up quite badly by Hua, yet he didn't complain at all. Ren Baqin didn't want to be too harsh on him, or else he would have just given him 1.5 pages. More of it could be considered as compensation. Get someone to sort out these 2 forms and the underlined technical information and send them to Ho Yen, Ren Baqin said as he placed the 3 pieces of paper at the corner of the table. After the man in black retreated, Ren Baqin rested his chin on his hand and felt as if he could recall something. After a while, an idea flashed through Ren Baqin's mind, and he slapped his thigh hard. Ren Baqin burst into laughter. That guy is waiting for me here. Ren Baqin finally understood and shook his head with a smile. He had originally planned to give Su Qing 1.5 pages. Su Qing had done a good job and he had a good relationship with him, so it was normal to give him 2 pages. In the end, because his son was beaten up, he gave 2.5 pages. The extra half a page meant that there were 7 or 8 more pieces of technical information, all of which could be put to use. This was Su Qing's plan. That guy deliberately created those 2 misunderstandings to make Hua misunderstand and then beat up his own son. He racked his brains just to get more benefits. He didn't say a word and asked me to think about it myself. In the end, I felt embarrassed and compensated him. Ren Baqin found it a little funny. This guy had been scheming all his life just to get some benefits. Of course, if Ren Baqin really pretended that nothing had happened, that guy would definitely think of ways to take advantage of this matter in the future. In any case, he wouldn't lose anything. Now this was the best gain for Su Qing. The 2 princes were beaten up and it didn't look good on them. Hua was also soft-hearted and knew that he had misunderstood Su Qing. When he met the 2 princes again in the future, he definitely wouldn't go too far. Moreover, they also obtained 7 or 8 more pieces of technical information. Although it was only 7 or 8 pieces of technical information, they were all mature technologies that involved far more than this number. This guy was much smarter than Emperor Qin. However, their situations were different. Su Qing was the emperor who restored the empire. His temperament, wisdom, and control of the imperial court were all very powerful. As for Emperor Qin, he ascended the throne in his teens and lost his power. All these years he had been an emperor with only a title but no power. Taking back his power and suppressing the aristocratic families was his entire goal all these years. Other than this, nothing else was important. In fact, as Ren Baqin thought, although Hua's 3 views weren't right, his heart wasn't bad. Otherwise he wouldn't have so many sons in the capital. While Ren Baqin was listening to what Hua had been doing these days, Hua specially went to visit the 2 unlucky guys who had been beaten up by her. She also got to know 2 friends, a princess and a concubine. Although they had ulterior motives, they were very smart and Hua got along well with them. They didn't have any complaints about Hua beating up the 2 princes. As a result, Hua felt even more guilty. If Ren Baqin knew about this situation, he could only say, "Dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and the son of a mouse can dig holes." What Su Qing was, his descendants would be like. Their brains were full of schemes. Hua's brain was full of muscles like her mother's. They looked fierce, overbearing, and not easy to deal with. In fact, they were easy to deceive. The premise was that they didn't use force against her. Furthermore, they shouldn't make her feel annoyed when they were scheming. Almost at the same time, the palace of Great Xia was in a mess. 10 minutes ago, Xia Yonghe was cultivating in his courtyard when a bald, burly man descended from the sky and injured him within 10 moves. The other party was unscathed and swaggered away. Xia Yonghe was dumbfounded. He had no idea what had happened. He could recognize the identity of the other party because it was too easy. That fierce face, wall-like body, and savage aura were typical of an aboriginal expert. Moreover, he was an expert from Longevity Heaven who could open up the heaven and earth domain. However, he didn't know what the other party wanted to do. Without saying a word, the other party jumped in and beat him up before swaggering away. The other party came all the way from Dayo just to beat him up? This was obviously not revenge. In that case, what did the other party want to do? What exactly is going on? Emperor Xia frowned and asked in a deep voice. Xia Yonghe wasn't only the #1 expert in the royal family of Great Xia, but he was also the #1 expert in Great Xia, Hou Yan and the Qin nation. Other than Qi Zixiao, he was the #1 expert. Xia Yonghe shook his head. He didn't know either. Emperor Xia was silent for a while before saying, "Who exactly is it? Is the difference in strength really that big? He actually defeated you so easily and came out unscathed. If it was Qi Zixiao, he could still accept it. However, the aboriginals actually had such an expert? Uncle, you are an expert who opened up the heavens and earth, the strongest expert in the world in the past century." Xia Yonghe's expression turned ugly. He shook his head and didn't want to speak. He had paid a huge price to reach this stage. For this reason, he couldn't leave the palace too far away for more than 3 days, and it would be difficult for him to advance further in his life. However, after paying such a huge price, a random person jumped out and beat him up like he was playing and then swaggered away. How could he accept this? Emperor Xia thought for a while and said, "Since the other party left, it seems that nothing happened. Maybe someone just broke through and wanted to find an expert to test his strength." This situation wasn't uncommon. However, Xia Yonghe felt even more depressed when he heard this. In any case, it was fine as long as the other party wasn't seeking revenge. One had to know that the current Great Xia was supported by Xia Yonghe. If anything happened to Xia Yonghe, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although Xia Yonghe's reputation was damaged this time, nothing major happened in the end. As the Emperor of Great Xia, he always considered stability. However, one day later, Xia Yonghe was attacked again. Another bald man jumped out, beat Xia Yonghe up and then swaggered away. Although it wasn't the same person, it was the same recipe and the same taste. Xia Yonghe was completely dumbfounded. He didn't know what was going on in this world. Why did so many experts appear and each of them came to beat him up? This was already 2 in a row. Emperor Xia and Xia Yonghe didn't know what happened. In the end, they could only send someone to Dayo to find out if something had happened in Dayo. However, on the 3rd night, a woman appeared in front of Xia Yonghe and beat him up. Xia Yonghe. #What exactly do you want? Tell me. Set a small goal first, for example 1 second. Chapter 1241. Emperor Xia and Xia Yonghe didn't know what was going on until Hua Er left Hou Yan and headed to Great Xia. This was a threat. After all, Great Xia had been the center of the human race for thousands of years, and the people there regarded everyone as country bumpkins. Even though Great Xia had been divided into 2 and Dayo was far superior to Great Xia in all aspects. However, many people in this era had never left the 150 kilometers radius of their homes in their entire lives. In the eyes of many people, Great Xia was still the center of the world. This also resulted in the habitual arrogance of the people of Great Xia. As a result, as the #1 expert in Great Xia, Hou Yan and the Qin nation, he was the only expert who could open up the heavens and earth. After being praised for so long and acting like a tyrant for more than 10 years, many people were afraid that he had an incorrect understanding of his own strength and would treat certain people the wrong way. After all, the experts who opened up the heavens and earth were still very strong. There were less than 100 of them in the entire human race, and they were all in the 60,000 mountains. There was only one wild expert. If such an expert really courted death, even though it wasn't a big deal, Hua Er might suffer. After all, she wasn't here to make friends and it was easy to cause conflict. Even if he were to be hacked into pieces, that would be a problem for the future. Furthermore, this worry wasn't groundless. Rinpoche had received news from many sources that Xia Yonghe had indeed become quite arrogant in recent years. Therefore there was such a threat. He believed that after these few days, Xia Yonghe would remain calm and rational most of the time. The only unlucky person was Xia Yonghe. He didn't even know the reason and was beaten up several times. Someone would come out of nowhere and beat him up, and he was almost autistic. He only understood after a few days. Jianghu was filled with grief and indignation. You should have said something at the time. You didn't say anything, just came over to beat me up and even changed people to beat me up every day? Is there anyone like you? Can't you be human? Jianghu, whom Great Xia relied on, was beaten up in different ways every day, and the final result was Hua Er's diplomatic mission to Great Xia went smoothly. However, Rinpoche hadn't paid much attention to these matters. Although he usually asked about Hua Er's situation, it was only because he was a father and was concerned about his daughter's first serious matter, who she met, and what she did every day. Recently, his main focus had been on helping the Empress approve memorials to the throne, as well as a few other major matters. Helping the Empress approve memorials to the throne was even more tiring than handling court affairs when the Empress wasn't around. At the very least, most of the memorials couldn't even reach him back then. Recently, the Empress had been working too hard and had to attend to almost every matter personally. As a result, Rinpoche was the unlucky one. Especially since there were a few important matters to attend to recently. One was to set up a production line to produce televisions. Dayo's television technology had been perfected for a long time. Part of it was based on Earth's technology, while the other part was based on new technology developed on the basis of Earth's technology. Although the materials in Dayo and Earth were different in many aspects. For example, this world didn't even have oil. As long as they knew the answer, they would be able to solve the problem step by step. There was never only one path to success. Even on Earth, there were several different types of display screens and different technologies were used. The other thing was to prepare a television station, DYTV1. Those unlucky fellows who were about to graduate from the academy were helping out with this. After all, those students were more creative than others. However, Rinpoche didn't have high requirements. His main goal was to have a news broadcast. As the mouthpiece of the imperial court, news broadcast was a good thing. As for the other programs, on paper there were a livelihood program, an agricultural technology program, and a gourmet food program that specialized in teaching people how to cook. In the early stages, these programs should be broadcast in rotation every day. After all, these programs involved various aspects, whether it was livelihood or agricultural technology. Presumably, no one would object if they were broadcast a few times a day. In addition, there was the highlight of the recent busy program, the high-altitude reconnaissance rocket. This had always been the focus of the laboratory. After working hard for so many years, they were finally going to see results. China launched its first high-altitude reconnaissance rocket in 1958. Currently, Dayo's technological reserves were much stronger than China's at that time. Overall, it shouldn't be weaker than China at the beginning of the 21st century. This was under the circumstances that China was lagging behind in many aspects. Rinpoche had never stopped inviting scientists. Today there were thousands of scientific and technological volunteers from Earth and Dayo. The frontiers of Dayo's technology were close to the current Earth. Around 2090, these were all brought by those new scientists. However, there was still a long way to go if he wanted to digest it and make it his own, and develop a technology that was suitable for this world based on it. Despite this, with the game guide in hand, Dayo's technological development was still very fast. Even though they were currently walking with a limp, this situation would eventually improve as batches of students completed their studies and entered various positions in society and research institutes. How's the preparation going? Rinpoche took some time to listen to the report. The rocket base was a little far from the capital. It would take about 7 to 8 hours to get there by car, and it was difficult for Rinpoche to find the time to make a trip. We have done the final checks and have solutions to all the problems. It is estimated that it will be launched in half a month, the person in charge of the rocket base said. Very good. I can't wait any longer, but I'm still waiting. Be careful, you are more professional than me in this aspect. I hope to see it successfully fly into the sky and stay in low Earth orbit. In the future, I will be able to look up and see that one of the stars in the sky belongs to us, Rinpoche reminded. The person in charge said confidently, yes, we are professionals. Yes, we are professionals. I believe that our big baby can complete its mission. We have been preparing for this day for 3 years. In fact, it's the fuel that is holding us back, not us. Now that the new fuel is very effective, nothing can stop us. That's for the best. Rinpoche smiled happily. You can now seek the opinions of the others and decide what reward you want. After waiting for so many years, it was finally time. As long as the rocket could reach the desired position, the satellite could be sent up. With the satellite there were many things that could be done. The transit signal was only the most basic. In addition there was reconnaissance. Up until now Rinpoche still didn't know the true appearance of this world. Who knew if Wuxia was round or flat, but judging from the curve of the Earth, it definitely wasn't round. In addition, the next step was to use the satellite to launch an attack in space. He had some ideas that had been verified in the laboratory on Earth. Now all that was left was a live-fire exercise. Of course, the most important thing was to look at the red moon in the sky. What the hell was that? Up until now, he couldn't forget his astonishment when he first heard that the moon was fake. That thing had been hanging in the sky for thousands of years or even longer, but it turned out to be fake. This news was too shocking. Using an astronomical telescope to observe it from the ground, no matter how you looked at it, it seemed real. Whether it was the light, shadow or other details, the moon looked real. When the satellite was in the sky and observed it from a close distance, it should be able to discover something. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1242. Are you ready? Rinpoche asked. Of course, we've been preparing for this day. Now it's our turn to shock the world. The person in charge of the rocket base smiled confidently and raised his chin, looking proud and complacent. As a professional, he had the right to do so. Start your performance according to the plan and open this grand ceremony for us. Today you are the main characters. Rinpoche wasn't stingy with his praise. It wouldn't be too much to praise this group of volunteers who didn't seek fame or profit. Of course, this was on the premise that they weren't lazy. Otherwise, was it because their necks were too stiff or because his 40-meter-long saber wasn't fast enough? From the looks of it, they were doing very satisfactorily. Although the progress wasn't as fast as expected, this was science and had to be done step by step. Even if you knew how to fly, you had to reach the basics first. Half a month passed by in a flash, and today was the day of the rocket launch. Many of Dayo's big shots gathered at the rocket base that was 7 to 8 hours away from the capital, even though they didn't understand the significance of this launch. It seems like Air Hua won't be able to make it back in time. Rinpoche turned around and walked to the Empress. Oh, the Empress responded faintly and didn't care much. In fact, she was only slightly better than Tong Xinye and the others. At least she knew that with satellites, it was much easier to surf the internet and watch TV series. Air Hua actually wants to witness history, Rinpoche said casually, not caring about the Empress's reaction. Although I'm in a hurry, I encountered some trouble. Someone dares to cause trouble for her? The Empress was slightly surprised. That's right. I opened this mountain and planted this tree. Air Hua encountered a robber who damaged her carriage and threw a big tantrum. Rinpoche chatted casually with the Empress as if he was gossiping. This incident was indeed quite unexpected. Even Xia Yonghe was beaten into submission. As a result, Air Hua encountered a robber who cut the tree on her way back. Her carriage was too fast and crashed into the robber. This incident was really like a joke. However, there are benefits to it. At least it taught her a lesson. Rinpoche grinned. Speeding is fun for a while, but it's always fun for a long time. The Empress rolled her eyes. Other people might not have noticed anything, but the Empress had been on Earth for a long time. You don't seem to be thinking about today's ascension. I thought it was important to you. The Empress said. Rinpoche nodded. Your Majesty, you are right. It is indeed very important. I believe in them. Besides, even if they fail, it's not a big deal. It's just a delay. We are on the right path. Even if we fail once, as long as we can find the problem, we will succeed next time. What can this thing do in the sky? Tong Xinye moved closer to Rinpoche and the Empress and asked. In this regard, he did not have any concept. Although this thing seemed very powerful to be able to fly in the sky, it didn't surprise him that it even had an airplane. Rinpoche thought about how to explain this to Tong Xinye. Finally, he said, in the future, every time you go to a brothel, I will know immediately. Now you know. Tong Xinye curled his lips. Then he thought of something and widened his eyes. Are you saying that this thing can monitor us? This can't be done, but as long as we succeed this time, the next satellite will be able to do it. In other words, every time you go to a brothel, Her Majesty will know immediately? Tong Xinye pretended to be shocked and gloated unabashedly. Rinpoche glanced at him and gritted his teeth. Could this old man still converse? Furthermore, was the Empress someone who cared about such things? Yes, she was. However, she wasn't the one monitoring the surveillance every day. He was still the one in charge of this thing. Everyone chatted for an hour. Thousands of miles away, many students from the Black Bamboo Academy were watching the live broadcast of the rocket in their classrooms. This was a major event for Dayo and the world. The bunch of old fogies in the imperial court didn't understand the significance of the rocket, but the students in the school did. These students were very excited for the entire day. Even though the image on the screen was of a rocket that stood there motionlessly, they understood the significance of this rocket. Dayo had finally taken an important step in exploring this world. Even though not all of them knew about the existence of the foreign races and didn't know the military value of rockets and satellites. To them, this rocket represented the technological strength of Dayo, represented an important step forward for Dayo, and also represented their future. In addition to them, many street corners in the capital were also broadcasting live, but there weren't many people watching. Most of them didn't understand the significance of the motionless iron cylinder. No one explained it to them. As the preparations came to an end and the countdown was about to end, Rinpoche's surroundings gradually quietened down. Although most people didn't know the significance of the rocket, it didn't prevent them from knowing that Zhao Prince Consort attached great importance to it, which meant that this thing was extremely useful. As the last seconds ticked by, Rinpoche looked at the button in the hands of the staff member in front of him and pressed it heavily. "Start, ignite," Rinpoche said in a deep voice. Following the sound, everyone, whether it was behind the huge glass in the base or in the streets of the Black Bamboo Academy and the capital thousands of miles away, could see the rocket spitting out orange flames. Although they didn't know how big this rocket was, they could roughly guess its size by comparing it to the other buildings in the footage. With the thrust of the flames, the rocket gradually began to lift off. "It's flying." The young people in the Black Bamboo Academy cheered. The graceful Tong Lan sat by the window, looked at the mirror image on the screen, and listened to the cheers from afar. Her mouth twitched slightly. She felt that if this thing was in her hands she would be able to do it. Even so, she was still fascinated by the rocket on the screen as it gradually left the ground and soared into the sky. This was what she should be doing. Ignition successful. The rocket has lifted off. Everything is going according to plan. There's no problem. The first segment is beginning to detach and the second segment is igniting. Rinpoche looked up at the sky along with the noise around him. At present it seemed like they were doing well. It's a success. Half an hour later, the rocket gradually left the atmosphere and began to enter the predicted orbit. Only then did the base begin to burst into thunderous cheers, and everyone looked excited. After a few years of hard work, they had finally achieved it. However, this was only the beginning. The next step was to send the satellite into the sky. And this rocket would fall in a few hours. The orbit that the rocket reached wasn't a complete vacuum and there was still thin air. After the centrifugal force decreased, it would be brought back to Zixiao Earth and star by the planet's gravity. However, that wasn't important anymore. The world was so big and only God knew where it would land. After all, he didn't have enough experience. Historical records. On the night of the 346-year Great Xia, a meteor fell into the palace. Several palaces were destroyed and many people were injured. Empress Xia, we were attacked by Dayo. What was Qi Zixiao trying to do? This wreckage clearly had the style of Dayo. Chapter 1243. Those who take the boat are all in the mortal world. Those who are fated can sit on the boat. Those who are not lucky can't get on the boat. Take your seat and go to transcendence. The Dharma boat leads you to the other shore. The sun and moon fly by like a shuttle, making you grow old. You have reached the end of your life. Lu Qing had a pious expression on his face as he recited the scriptures with the others. After a long time, they heard someone knock on the wooden fish and say, "Class dismissed." Only then did everyone rise and exchange their insights with each other. Now that the school of White Lotus had developed, it was no longer just a few people spreading their teachings everywhere like before. Especially after the crystal balls containing the image of the Ajati matriarch were sent over, the sect developed even faster. The image in the crystal ball, no matter from which angle, would appear to be the front image of the Ajati matriarch sitting cross-legged. Even if dozens of people looked at it at the same time from different angles, everyone would see the same image. The magic of the crystal ball made it even more convincing. Currently, there were over 1 million believers in the vicinity of Stainless City alone. Among them, there were people from various races, and they were even spreading all the way south. Among the upper, middle, and lower races, the lower races were the most numerous. There were also quite a few believers from the middle races, and there were even a few believers from the upper races. The structure of the school of White Lotus was also clear. At the top was the Grand Priest, the spokesperson of the Ajati matriarch. Below them was the officiator, who was in charge of unifying an area. Below them were the red robes, and they were in charge of the development and arrangement of their respective races' believers. Every red robe was an extremely famous person in their respective race. In different races, the Ajati matriarch combined the myths of each race and developed different gods. Below that, there were also sacrifices, lectures, imparting skills, and good men and women. The tasks were all different. Among them, the kind-hearted children and kind-hearted women were responsible for controlling small groups, and each small group was a big family. It could be said that the current White Lotus cult was very strict and had a firm grasp over all the believers. When one side was in trouble, they would come to help each other. The believers of many races helped each other, forming an extremely powerful force. Although there were no top-notch experts among them, they included people from the Unsullied City and the surrounding regions. The courtyard that Lu Qing and the others were currently in was the residence of a member of the Nashi clan. "Priestess, I've heard a piece of news." A blue-faced alien respectfully said to Lu Qing. "There might be a war. I'm worried that some of our brothers and sisters will spill their blood in foreign lands." "What's going on?" Lu Qing's heart thumped. He took the Blue Spirit clan man to the room next door and asked him about it. The Earth Spirits went to the north to suppress the Forsaken race, but they failed. When they left, they had tens of thousands of soldiers and tens of thousands of powerful mounts, but when they returned, there were only about 2,000 clansmen left. The Rolling Wind tribe was greatly shaken, and it is possible that they will summon the Flint tribe and the Scarlet Sand tribe to suppress the Forsaken tribe. Lu Qing's expression was warm as he said gratefully, "Thank you for your information. This will allow some of our brothers and sisters to prepare early. There are many of our brothers and sisters in the Scarlet Sand tribe. War is killing, bloodshed, and sin, but we are powerless to control our destiny. We can only bid farewell to our brothers and sisters with tears. There will be a day." The Blue Spirit race disciple's expression dimmed as he thought of the Heaven Lord's formidable strength. After sending off the members of the Blue Spirit clan, Lu Qing quickly transmitted the news to Lin Dong. After a few rounds, the news reached Ren Baqian's desk. The Rolling Wind clan actually reacted so quickly. Ren Baqian frowned. He originally thought that the Earth Spirit clan wouldn't rely on external forces and would have at least a few years to prepare for the next war. He didn't expect that not long after the Earth Spirit clan left the wall between the two worlds, there would be movement in Stainless City. Ren Baqian retrieved the information on the Flint tribe and the Scarlet Sand tribe. At present, he had collected information on all the foreign races in Stainless City, as well as some information on the other races in other regions. He had already collected information on almost half of the other races. There were a total of 36 superior races and more than 200 intermediate races. Within the territory controlled by the Rolling Stone tribe, there were 31 intermediate races and 17 main races. The other 14 races only had a small number of races within the territory of the Rolling Stone tribe. The Flintstone tribe was one of the 17 main races within the territory of the Rolling Stone tribe, and it was one of the more powerful races. The characteristic of this race was their large size. An adult Flintstone tribe member was more than 4 meters tall and had a stone-like skin that was covered in flames. Furthermore, the Flintstone tribe was extremely powerful. An adult Flintstone tribe member had the strength of at least a few thousand kilograms. Coupled with their stone-like skin, their combat power was amazing, and they weren't afraid of death. The only drawback was that they weren't very smart. The Scarlet Sand tribe and the Flintstone tribe usually lived together. Although they were an inferior race, they were also one of the stronger ones. Not only were they not afraid of heat and flames, but they could also swallow red sand to form a type of red sand arrow. They could then use their unique organs to compress the air and shoot it out. Its power wasn't inferior to that of a gun. The Flintstone tribe, which was good at close combat, and the Scarlet Sand tribe, which was good at long-range combat, worked together. However, Ren Baqian didn't care too much. The Scarlet Sand tribe could only shoot 10 red sand arrows a day, which couldn't compare to a machine gun. As for the Flintstone tribe, the layer of stone on their body was indeed amazing, and their skin was covered in high-temperature flames. However, their weakness was also very obvious, and they were afraid of water. It wasn't difficult to get water when they were prepared. Moreover, there was something called a fire extinguisher. What really concerned Ren Baqian was the intention of the Rolling Wind tribe. Even deeper was the indefinite Heavenly Lord of Stainless City. She wasn't restricted like the deity of the Earth Spirit clan. If this deity was provoked, it wouldn't be easy to deal with. Rinpoche didn't know if the broken body of the human emperor could stop it. However, the broken body of the human emperor could only be used 3 times, and it was best not to use it if possible. This news made Rinpoche's good mood disappear without a trace. The foreign races were always a big worry. According to Rinpoche, I'm already a few decades old, but I'm still working hard every day because of this group of enemies. Because of this news, even the progress of the forward operating base at the border between the two worlds had to be slowed down. He wanted to guess the intentions of the Rolling Wind tribe through the movements of the foreign races. The news spread very slowly, mainly because the movements of the foreign races were too slow. After a full month, Rinpoche finally confirmed the second piece of news. Is there any news? During this period the Empress was very calm. In any case she just had to fight them. If she had the time to think about this, she might as well drink more wine in the palace so that she wouldn't have to drink when the war started. 5,000 people from the Flintstone tribe and 80,000 people from the Scarlet Sand tribe. There are no other races. They are slightly stronger than the Earth Spirit clan, but the difference isn't big. It seems like they don't want an all-out war. Otherwise it wouldn't be these two races. Even if they don't have much food, they can still send out an army that is several times their size. The Empress leaned on the recliner and moved her body to make herself more comfortable. Well, with this military strength, they are most likely trying to occupy the 2 gaps in the border between the 2 worlds and firmly suppress us in the 60,000 mountains. As long as we can't cross the border between the 2 worlds, we will never be able to become stronger. It seems like they are still waiting for the Earth Spirit clan to solve the problem themselves. However, there is no need to worry. Our navy has already discovered the gap at the coast. The problem now is to take over the gap without them discovering it. The White Lotus Society is developing very quickly and has a large number of believers. It is best if we can control the caravan that travels between the coast and Stainless City. This way we can cover up the news that we are in control of the gap. Water battle. I'm not worried if it's on the surface of the water. If it's underwater it will be a little troublesome. That is their home ground. The Empress frowned. Fighting in the water was different from fighting on land. It was very difficult for humans to fight those amphibious races under the water. It is said that there is an amphibious race called the sickle. They are most powerful in the water and can form an acupoint effect through rapid slashes. Not only are their slashes powerful, but they can also generate hundreds of degrees of heat and electric currents. They are indeed very difficult to deal with. However, in some ways this race is actually very easy to deal with. I have an idea. We don't have to worry about them. Rinpoche shook his head. What idea? What do you plan to do? The Empress asked curiously. Your Majesty, you probably don't know what it means to illegally electrocute fish. Rinpoche seemed to have thought of something interesting and smiled brightly. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, Bookhouse. Chapter 1244. Somewhere along the coastline in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. A forward operating base with hundreds of staff and 8 berths was located here. Chao Zhong sat on a cliff near the coast. All he could see was the endless blue sea with white birds flying nearby. The sun, the ospreys, the moist air, and the ubiquitous smell of the sea were all there was here. Below him was the last harbor of the human race in the 60,000 mountains. A few steel warships were docked at the harbor, and 2 steel freighters that had just arrived in the morning were busy unloading supplies. The people on the freighters looked like ants. That was all there was here. To many people this place was very boring. Apart from maintenance and overhaul, there was also training. After staying here for 3 months, even a sow would have delicate features. However, to Chao Zhong this was his favorite place. Ever since he saw the One Piece comic more than a decade ago, he had been attracted by the freedom and the fight against the heavens. In the end, he chose to graduate early and join the newly established navy. However, life on the sea was different from what he had imagined. There weren't so many islands and there weren't any drinking pirates. There was only the sea and sky, endless turbulence thousands of meters away from the coastline, countless submerged reefs on the coast, and sea beasts that occasionally crossed the boundary. From Wangjing all the way south, 13 ships had sunk in the tens of thousands of kilometers. There were undercurrent sea beasts outside and submerged reefs inside. It was extremely dangerous to find a way through the cracks. Too many of his good friends and subordinates had died along the way. Even his flagship had been changed twice. There were too many things entrusted to this sea and this fleet. He felt that he couldn't leave it anymore. He had a simple thought. Leaving the sea means betraying the sacrifices of so many friends and subordinates. However, Chao Zhong wasn't thinking about this at this time. He just looked calmly at the sea in the distance and wondered what was in the depths of the sea. At this moment, the big bell in the base was suddenly rung. Chao Zhong stretched out his hand and jumped up from the ground, rushing back to the base. What's wrong? What happened? 6 rings. We've encountered an enemy. Where is the enemy? There were Marines running around everywhere in the base. Some of them were Aboriginals, while others were people from the Yun Nation. In terms of going to sea, the people of the Yun Nation were much better than the Aboriginals. What happened? Chao Zhong was no more than 30 years old, but he was calm and collected. Many people calmed down when they saw him. Lieutenant, it's the Black Dragon. It was attacked 200 nautical miles to the south. The attackers are from the Sickle clan. Chao Zhong was astonished. The Scythe tribe lived 500 nautical miles to the south, and their range of activity usually did not exceed 200 nautical miles. How could they have come so far this time? Can the Black Dragon still hold on? Tell them to leave quickly and wait for reinforcements, Chao Zhong said solemnly. There was no point in being anxious. 200 nautical miles would take at least 10 hours to reach. It's too late, Nightmare Dragon has sunk. The moment they were attacked, a huge hole was opened in the bottom of the ship. There's an expert among them, they only sent back the location and the identity of the enemy, and then there's no movement. The person who reported had a gloomy look on his face. Chao Zhong's face turned ashen. He turned around and punched a hole in the wall. His classmates were on the Black Dragon as well as 120 Marines. Lieutenant, gather people to take revenge. Isn't it just the Scythe tribe? We still have a lot of explosives to blow up the submerged reefs. At most, we'll sacrifice our lives. No matter what, we have to recoup our losses with interest. Chao Zhong was annoyed by their noise and said coldly, all of you shut up. Do you think this is a street fight? Or a fight in the pugilistic world? Splattering blood on the spot in a fit of rage? It's fine if you all die, but if you delay His Highness, who knows how many more lives will be lost. Are you going to use your lives to make up for it? You're going to use other people's lives to make up for it. How many people died at Jianghu Stream half a year ago? We can't just let it go like this, someone said, unconvinced. To the Aboriginals, death wasn't scary. What they were afraid of was dying sullenly. If their comrades were killed and they couldn't avenge them, it would be too sullen. Chao Zhong also felt sullen. However, he was the lieutenant of the Navy and had studied at Black Bamboo Academy. He had some understanding of the conflicts between humans and foreign races. No matter how angry he was, he couldn't be as rash as the others. Right now he was especially touched by a saying, for a gentleman to take revenge, 10 years is not too long. If he hadn't read so many books, he might have directly rushed forward. However, it was precisely because he had read so many books and thought too much about things that he couldn't be as rash and reckless as them. Like a gentleman, he had read too many books and couldn't recklessly take revenge. Sooner or later we will go to war with them and make them pay for it. Go back and make arrangements. Although the turtle dragon has sunk, the heads of our comrades must be brought back. Also, find out why their range of activities has expanded so much. After chasing everyone away, Chao Zhong left a messenger to contact the capital and received Ren Baqian in no time. After listening to the whole story, Ren Baqian was silent for a while and said, reduce your range of activities for the next few days. As for revenge, it will be avenged very soon. Very soon we will make our move against them. However, you all can't clash with them privately. I still have to prepare some things and send them over. When we make our move, we have to strike like lightning and not let any of them live. As for investigating the expansion of their range of activities, you all don't have to go. I will send some experts over. After hearing this, Chao Zhong felt more at ease. He was afraid that the revenge would take too long. Since Her Highness had said so, it should be done very soon. This was a sea and land transportation route. The progress was slow before because they needed to find a route to avoid and clear submerged reefs. Now that the route had been opened up, it would only take 2 months for a one-way trip. Ren Baqian hung up the radio and contacted the border between the two worlds. Li Fu and the others had reoccupied that area after the Earth Spirit left. After handing the matter over to Li Fu, there would naturally be a few experts who were good at spying. He also wanted to know why the Blade Sickle had expanded their range of activities. Was it because of the recent mobilization of Stainless City or some other reason? Would it have any impact on the upcoming battle? Then, he made a trip back to Earth and brought 2 sets of nuclear power equipment from the spacecraft to the laboratory for modification. The nuclear power equipment of the spacecraft's engine was mainly stable and stable. If he wanted to electrocute the fish, He needed to output the maximum power in a short period of time in order to cause fatal damage to the blade sickle in a small area of the sea. Half a month passed in a flash. After the nuclear power discharge equipment was modified and tested, it was sent to the cargo ship that was docked in Wangjing. Accompanying it were some researchers in the laboratory who tested and recorded the actual combat power of this set of equipment. The code name for this operation was legal electrocution of fish. At this time, Li Fu also sent back the reason why the blade sickle had appeared in that area of the sea. They were chasing a dragon. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1245. Is this a sickle? It looks like an arthropod. It's amazing. The creator is really great. This is actually an intelligent creature. Look at those buildings. Their intelligence is at least equivalent to that of primitive people or even more advanced. I'm more curious about their brains, even though they don't look very smart. A few men and women in white coats were in a cave at the bottom of a cliff 1,500 meters away from the sickle's nest. They were amazed by what they saw on the screen. Through the clear seawater, they could see the shallow underwater buildings, and a small number of buildings were located on the shore. Figures could be seen roaming around those buildings. They were an intelligent creature that was 1.5 to 2 meters long, had 3 pairs of legs and 4 pairs of legs. They did not look like humans at all. Especially the pair of huge claws, it seemed to have great power. The strength of these creatures was related to their lifespan and size. The longer they lived, the bigger they were, and the more powerful they were. At the same time, their colors were brighter. An ordinary sickle had the strength of a Kismet Heaven expert and was mainly greenish-black in color. A sickle with the strength of a Cardinal Heaven expert was mainly rainbow-colored. As for a sickle with the strength of a Longevity Heaven expert, there was only one. It was completely red and it was 3 meters long. It hibernated in a simple building on the shore every day. Although there weren't many powerful individuals, they were especially difficult to deal with underwater, and their strength was 1 level higher. No one wanted to fight them underwater. Is that a flood dragon? It's really beautiful. The legendary dragon is indeed real. A middle-aged man who looked like a Chinese looked at the huge creature trapped in a cage in a corner of the building complex with an infatuated look in his eyes. The word dissection was practically written on his face. Quick look, aren't those two mating? Do they mate according to the season or are they in heat like humans? Those two are male. Alright, may God forgive them. Hey guys, are you done with your work? Of course, it's just the simplest assembly. It's not difficult for us. That's good. We'll have seafood to eat tomorrow. I wonder how this thing tastes compared to the Boston lobster. The leader of the operation laughed. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone looked at him strangely. What's wrong? I'm your boss now, so you have to respect me. Respect. Do you understand? Why are you looking at me like that? Well, no matter what, these things are intelligent creatures. They have their own culture, language, and simple words. Eating them makes me feel like I'm eating humans, a woman in her 30s said with a look of disgust. The middle-aged Chinese man smiled and said, You have to say that even if I jump down from here and starve to death, I won't take a bite. What? The woman clearly did not understand the old Chinese joke from 70 to 80 years ago. The middle-aged man smiled and did not explain further. This joke was indeed too old. Not many young people in China nowadays knew about it. The interior of the cave was the size of a basketball court, and there were 2 huge nuclear power generators for spaceships, which had a power of megawatts. The generator set was connected to 4 cables that were as thick as an arm and covered with a layer of rubber. They were coiled on one side and occupied a third of the cave. The leader pressed a button. A few minutes later, a thin mirror appeared in the air, and a beautiful woman in blue walked out. No matter how many times the crowd saw this scene, they could not believe it. In the shadow of the cave, another person walked out. Tang Gu and Dongwa Sun were the 2 best at stealth and assassination among the many experts. Are you ready? Tang Gu raised his eyebrows and said lightly. Yes, you just need to put the front ends of these cables into these 4 points. The leader pulled up the map taken from above and marked the 4 points in red. As long as we can connect these 4 points, we'll be able to catch all of them. As long as we can force them out of the sea, Tang Gu said lightly. She didn't really believe that these things could wipe out the enemy in one fell swoop. The 2 huge devices in the corner and the steel cables that were as thick as an arm made it hard for her to believe that they could be so powerful. These experts and scientists had a completely different understanding of power. After sending these 4 cables to the designated points, Nail them into the sand with these steel awls. Send me a message when you leave the water. Remember, don't go into the water or touch water. When they're electrocuted, don't touch them in any way. The leader warned. He had to warn them. Even now, there were many people who were electrocuted in the imperial capital every year. He did not understand why those people liked to step on electric wires or telephone poles so much. Just because the birds were fine didn't mean that they were fine. 220V wasn't fatal to most aboriginals, but this one was enough to turn even a Cardinal Heaven expert into charcoal if they didn't leave within a few seconds. Tang Ge nodded. Zhao Prince Consort had also warned her about this, so she did not take it seriously. The two of them took the high-definition map and went to compare the positions from a high vantage point. They did not return until late at night. This time there were 5 people. In addition to Tang Ge and Dong Sun, there were also Ma Hongyu and 2 other experts with good movement skills. Li Fu had led dozens of people to set up an ambush around the sickles. A group of people would attack the experts in the sickles as soon as possible, while the others would prevent any sickles from escaping. We're done with the ambush. You can take action now. After listening to Li Fu's message through the earpiece, Tang Ge and the others carried the mountainous cable and left the cave. Ma Hongyu was in charge of the overall situation to deal with any emergencies. The cable was more than 1,000 meters long and weighed at least 1,000 kilograms. More importantly, there was a long tail behind it that had to be delivered to the designated position. Fortunately, as they got closer, the mountainous cable shrunk rapidly, and its weight was reduced a lot. Dong Sun stopped for a moment. There are 2 sickles mating at the position you're going to. Get rid of them first. Don't make too much noise and don't bleed. These things have a very good sense of smell. Dong Sun put the cable aside and turned into a shadow, disappearing into the night. In just a moment, a figure appeared behind 2 sickles that were entangled in the water at the edge of the shore. A black whip was thrown out from his hand and wrapped around the necks of the 2 sickles, quickly dragging them to the shore. After dealing with these 2 sickles, Dong Sun went back to carry the cable and set off again. Number 1 in position. Number 2 in position. Number 3 in position. Tang Ge was carrying the cable and facing the sickles settlement. The others were in the north of the settlement and she was the only one in the south, so she had to cross over. You guys attack first and attract their attention, Tang Ge said after reaching her position. Remember, don't fall into the water. Start. Li Fu ordered in the earpiece. More than 20 figures appeared from the darkness. They covered a distance of hundreds of meters in 2 breaths and arrived above the sickles settlement. A huge fire snake appeared in the sky and swooped down, lighting up half of the night sky. Set a small target first, such as 1 second. Remember, bookseller's residence. Chapter 1246. However, when they were dozens of meters away from a simple building, 2 indistinct air waves appeared and instantly blew up the fire snakes. Then there was a loud sonic boom. The strongest expert from the blade sickle race, whose entire body was red, jumped up from the ground and waved a pair of huge hooks. Dozens of almost invisible air waves went straight for everyone. Don't take it head-on, Li Fu ordered while pointing the iron awl in his hand forward. Boom. An electric ball appeared in the air. Li Fu's body was blasted more than 10 meters away, and the front of the iron awl in his hand turned red. This thing is really strong. Li Fu was speechless. His speed was also extremely fast. One could only vaguely see the hooks in front of its body tremble slightly before it slashed once. The others were already prepared and retreated from their original positions. They could even feel the suction coming from their sides. This thing completely cut through the air, and the air flowed like water, forming this kind of suction. However, this suction was so strong that an earthwheel expert would probably be sucked in without any resistance. Asterisk, what the hell is this thing talking about? In any case, you can go and die. Someone shouted. Thousands of silver threads shot out from his hand and enveloped the expert like a spider web. Even steel would be cut into countless small pieces in an instant. However, the thousands of silver threads broke one after another before they could even get close. Every time a silver thread broke, the expert's hand trembled and a few drops of blood dripped down. Thousands of silver threads were broken, and his hand was densely covered in blood. 5 fire snakes appeared in the air again and wriggled toward the expert from the blade sickle race. At the same time, 9 arrows were shot in a row. The 9 arrows collided in the air, and finally 4 arrows were shot from 4 different angles toward the expert. A giant sword slashed down from the sky. A pair of giant golden hammers smashed down one after another like 2 mountains. Boom, boom, boom. With a series of loud noises, the 4 arrows shattered in the air and the giant sword broke. However, the strongest expert from the blade sickle race could no longer resist and was smashed into the sea by the giant hammers. This thing is really difficult to deal with, especially on land. If we were in the water and lost our agility, it would be impossible to fight with this thing, Li Fu said in a deep voice. After waiting for a few seconds, the expert from the blade sickle race didn't show up again and hid in the sea. After all, with so many experts waiting in the sky, only a fool would come out. The water was his territory. It seems that it's not going to come out. Is Jianghu ready? Li Fu asked. At a corner of the coast, Jianghu was nailing the ring at the front end of the cable into the sand with a steel awl that was 1.5 meters long. Number 4 is ready. I've already of people of blade sickle race. Of electricity of sick, blade, Only a few of them spasmed and jumped to the surface of the water. However, in order to fight the enemy, they were all in the deep part of the water. Before they reached the surface of the water, they were all blackened. Only the strongest of them, the red expert of the blade sickle race, spasmed and jumped out of the water. However, what awaited him were giant swords, stone mountains and sledgehammers, which smashed him into the water again. Everyone saw a red figure dancing in the blue water. Well, actually, it didn't look so poetic at all. It was more like polio. It wasn't until a minute later that the red body gradually stopped moving. Countless black objects floated on the surface of the sea. There were fish, blade sickles and some other unknown things. Many people were speechless as they watched from the sky. Such a troublesome alien race expert had died just like that? Everyone suddenly hated the weaklings in the cave, even though they were on the same side now. Tang Ji's expression also changed. If he was in the water, he would probably end up like that. He shuddered at the thought that he would turn into a blackened corpse. Although he had been prepared to die in battle against these aliens, he couldn't die in such an ugly way. Okay, it's over. You can stop on your side. Before Li Fu's voice faded, the surface of the sea, which was jumping with electricity, began to darken, leaving only the smell of burning. Team 2, no aliens escaped, right? Li Fu asked. Not even a ghost, the people on the periphery said unhappily. In that kind of situation, everything was burnt. How could there be anyone alive? Leave a team of people to search the area and then guard the vicinity to prevent any fish from escaping the net. Everyone else get some rest. We'll clean up here tomorrow. These blade sickles all retreated into the water the moment they were attacked. Naturally, no fish escaped. They were all wiped out under the megavolt attack. The next morning, everyone began to check the place. Although the blade sickles were all dead, there were still a lot of things left. These blade sickles had used some kind of coral to build houses. Although many of them had collapsed, most of them were preserved. They found many stone slabs, which were probably used by the blade sickles to record certain things. However, no one could understand the tadpole-like words on them. Apart from that, the most heartbreaking thing was that the flood dragon had also been burnt. When it was dragged out of the cage, it was at least 10 meters long. It had 2 claws under its abdomen and 2 lumps on its forehead. Other than that, it looked like a giant python. You're right. Even if I die from jumping off a cliff, even if I starve to death, I won't eat these things. The white woman looked at the hundreds of burnt things on the shore and repeated herself. I thought there would be seafood. The leading Caucasian scientist shrugged. I don't know if these things can still be eaten. Flood dragon. What a pity this thing was originally alive. But even if it's burnt, we should still be able to analyze something. Another Chinese scientist was still thinking about the black lump of flood dragon. This could be said to be the obsession of the Chinese. Their intelligence might be even higher than what we imagined. Look at these pictures, they might be the cultivation methods they practice. And these patterns, they look like herbs and ores? Anyway, there are plenty of these things. This is just a small tribe. I believe there will be a lot of these things along the coast to the south. There's nothing to be regretful about. Next, some of the spoils of war, scrap copper, scrap metal, coral slabs and some charred corpses, were sent back to Dayo after being frozen. Chao Zhong led the navy to transport a large number of supplies and was ready to build a new forward operating base here. This place was more suitable for building a base than the other 2 gaps in the boundary wall. At least, the transportation distance was shorter, and the shipping capacity was larger. Logistical supplies were easier, and the surrounding threats were fewer. Chapter 1247. However, my author account is my QQ account. I don't know if I can still log in with my frozen QQ account. If it doesn't update at night, then it means that I can't log in. While the browser is still open, I should quickly publish the chapter that I'm writing. I just tried, but I can't log in with my phone's author assistant. In addition, I have to log in every once in a while, so there's no point in not shutting down the computer. The pretty boy from the Empress's family is a tragedy. Currently typing, please wait for a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 1248. Not many people knew that at the border of the Wall of Two Worlds in the north of Stainless City, a small tribe of sickles had disappeared without a trace. At the same time, the person in charge of a caravan in Stainless City died. Many people thought that it was done by a competitor, but no one noticed that the new person in charge of the caravan was from the White Lotus Society. In other words, some people noticed but no one cared about it. The White Lotus Society was currently very widespread among the low and middle races, but it hadn't caused any disturbances. In addition, there were very few cults that spanned multiple races, and no one thought that they would be able to cause any trouble. In other words, it wasn't illegal to form a cult among the foreign races. After receiving this news, Renbachin was finally relieved. Next, he could boldly build a new forward operating base and expand another logistics base 500 nautical miles away. As long as he controlled this caravan, he would be able to conceal the fact that the humans had occupied that place for a short period of time. He could also obtain some special products from other races through this caravan. For example, the materials for the Earth Spirit's marching pills were something that Renbachin had been envious of for a long time. Moreover, he didn't know how many treasures there were in the 237 square kilometers of territory occupied by the foreign races. At this time, Renbachin was in his sea of knowledge. An indomitable giant Buddha with a faint smile was standing on a planet. Although the giant Buddha was made of stone, no matter from which angle he looked at it, he always felt that its eyes were looking at him as if it were alive. There was a permanent five-colored brilliance around the giant Buddha's body. The colorful brilliance was like a painting frozen in time, frozen around the giant Buddha. I finally cultivated it. Next, I have to cut off a piece of my spirit to make it more eye-catching. Renbachin floated in front of the giant Buddha, used his mental cultivation method and cut off his left arm with his right hand. Oh! Renbachin's body trembled in the air, and his face instantly turned pale. He fell for thousands of meters before stabilizing himself. It really hurts. Renbachin took a few deep breaths. Cutting off one's spirit was much more painful than a physical injury. In other words, he was a fierce man. Anyone else would have fainted. When Renbachin first practiced Rui visualization, he died countless times, was cut into pieces and was burned by the wind and fire countless times. He still felt unbearable pain. If it was anyone else, no matter how strong they were, they would not be able to withstand this blow to their divine soul. After gasping in the air for a long time, Renbachin wiped the non-existent sweat off his forehead, stretched out his finger, and the severed arm in the air turned into a beam of golden light and drilled into the giant Buddha. While paying attention to the changes in the giant Buddha, he controlled his body and regrown his left arm. A strong sense of weakness filled his entire body. Even when he was heavily injured during the 7 days of dual cultivation, he had never felt so weak. There seemed to be something missing in his heart. As time went by, Renbachin gradually felt a connection with that Buddha statue. It wasn't like what he had thought, that he had another body. Instead, it was a mysterious feeling. The giant Buddha seemed to have given birth to a young consciousness. Both of them came from the same bloodline, and there was a closeness of blood being thicker than water. At the same time, they could sense some of each other's feelings, but they could not completely control each other. The lowest level of connection seems to be sufficient. Renbachin nodded. The current situation was exactly what he wanted. He did not want to control this man-made Buddha. He was more afraid that their minds would be connected, and when this Buddha absorbed too many distracting thoughts, it would corrode him instead. Among the predecessors who practiced the ancient scroll of methods, this kind of situation had happened before. At present, the lowest level of connection could be said to be cutting off a part of one's divine soul to form another person. Although the degree of control was very low, it would not be invaded. As for the part of the divine soul that had been cut off, it could only be replenished through long-term practice and some natural treasures. Renbachin came out of his sea of knowledge and first informed Tianjing Basin to transfer some materials to build a Buddha statue. In order to collect the power of will to become a god, the statue also needed some special materials and a special method to build it. Many of the materials were precious and expensive, but they were nothing to Rinpoche. With just a few words, a large number of materials and manpower were mobilized. After bidding farewell to the Empress, he went straight to Tianjin Basin. With a plane, the journey didn't take long, but the plane could only reach the entrance of Tianjin Basin. There was a huge magnetic field in Tianjin Basin. In many places, even wireless signals were blocked, and the plane route had to bypass this large area. After recovering Tianjin Basin 20 years ago, this was Rinpoche's first time here, and it could be considered a revisit. Rinpoche's schedule wasn't arranged too quickly. After all, the Buddha statue hadn't been built yet, so he took this opportunity to inspect various parts of Tianjin Basin and see the current situation. Although he could see it from the reports, it wasn't as clear as seeing it with his own eyes. As soon as he entered the first city, Rinpoche noticed a few monks begging for alms in the crowd. Although Rinpoche knew that Buddhism was developing well in Tianjin Basin, he was still slightly surprised. What are they begging for? Rinpoche asked. Beside him was Jin Kunming, the commander of the rearguard commandery. Although he often traveled around, he knew more about the situation in Tianjin Basin than Rinpoche. Those monks said that giving alms to them is fated with Buddha. In any case, I don't really believe them. If your highness doesn't like it, I can get them to clean up these monks and temples, Jin Kunming said. I'm asking about what they are begging for alms. Is it food or property? Rinpoche glanced at him. I'll get someone to ask. Jin Kunming realized that he had misunderstood Rinpoche's meaning and quickly gave the order. Not long after, someone reported, Your Highness, they are begging for bricks. Are they going to build a temple? Rinpoche immediately understood. He knew more about Buddhism than most people. In that case, don't bother about them and let them be, Rinpoche said and suddenly thought of something. How many Buddhists are there in Tianjin Basin now? About 3 million. Tianjin Basin had a population of close to 70 million. 3 million believers was indeed a lot. After the war, the common people had a hard time surviving, which gave Buddhism a lot of room to develop. Buddhism also gave the common people a psychological sustenance and saved the imperial court a lot of trouble. Rinpoche toured and patrolled along the way. 20 years had passed, and the damage caused by the war to Tianjin Basin almost didn't leave any traces. People seemed to have forgotten about the war. However, the complexion and mental state of the common people were much better than before. Rinpoche still remembered the first time he came here. Even if the people weren't in dire straits, they weren't much better. Several major organizations attacked each other, and the common people were left with numbness on their faces. Now, the faces of the common people were a lot livelier, and they weren't as hungry as before. After all, there were so many high-yielding crops, and the land in Tianjin Basin was also fertile. If there were still people who didn't have enough to eat, Rinpoche would investigate the governance here. As for the sects in the underworld, they were relatively rare now. Most of them had been wiped out by the army and turned into ashes. Those who could survive were those who were more obedient at the time. Now, they had connections with the rearguard commandery and had a large number of disciples serving there. During this period, Rinpoche also encountered things that made him frown. There were still cases of people oppressing the common people, especially those sects whose disciples served in the rearguard commandery. They had now become a major force in Tianjin Basin and occupied a lot of fertile land. This made Rinpoche ponder whether he should start with them. 20 years of peace had also nourished many corrupt officials. Rinpoche kept all of this in mind and was ready to clean up the rearguard commandery when he returned. Along the way, it took him a full 20 days to arrive at the Jingshin Temple. That's right, the largest temple built by the little monk here was also called the Jingshin Temple. Rinpoche first guarded the outside of the main hall before he stepped inside and looked at the benevolent Buddha statue. The Buddha statue looked a little colorful. Although it had just been built, it looked a little old. Rinpoche walked around it and confirmed that there were no problems with it. It was built according to his requirements, and the words and patterns that he wanted to engrave were also engraved. He then stood in front of the Buddha statue and flicked his finger between his eyebrows. A colorful ball flew out from between his eyebrows, drew an arc in the air, and drilled into the body of the Buddha statue. The surface of the Buddha statue suddenly emitted a colorful light. It even shone out of the main hall, causing everyone outside to be amazed. As the colorful light gradually shrank back into the body, Rinpoche saw a colorful halo appear behind the head of the Buddha statue. At the same time, the Buddha statue also gave people a feeling of being alive. An immature consciousness transmitted a childlike feeling. Rinpoche scanned his sea of knowledge. Although the giant Buddha on the planet was still there, it was much dimmer. That giant Buddha was the link between him and this newborn consciousness. Grow up well, little guy. I hope you can become a true god, Rinpoche said softly. After this little guy absorbed an immeasurable amount of power of will, it would become stronger and stronger as time passed. At the same time, it would also be influenced by the power of will. As for what it would become in the end, even Rinpoche himself didn't know. He only hoped that it would be a benevolent god. Chapter 1249. Before Rinpoche left the tranquil temple, he wrote a plaque for it. The words, "Deity and Buddha are spiritual." With this plaque and the halo behind the head of the Buddha statue, the tranquil temple's reputation would surely spread far and wide. With more devotees, the deity would grow faster. After doing all this, Rinpoche asked people to keep an eye on the situation at the tranquil temple before returning to the capital. On the way, Rinpoche received feedback from the deity's clone. The giant Buddha on the planet was constantly emitting strands of pure power of wish. As this power of wish was emitted, it would be transformed into spiritual power to repair the injuries he suffered when his spirit was split. At the same time as the power of wish was transformed, Rinpoche could vaguely hear voices, but he couldn't hear them clearly. It was as if someone was saying something in a very distant place. This was also the content recorded in the ancient scroll of methods. After splitting the deity's clone, the power of wish returned from the deity's clone would be different depending on the degree of connection between the two. If the degree of connection between the two was high, the power of wish returned would be higher. However, the disadvantage was that he would be contaminated by the distracting thoughts of the power of wish. Since he had the lowest degree of connection, the amount of power of wish returned was smaller, and he would be less contaminated. Therefore, it was a choice between becoming a madman who rapidly improved his strength or slowly cultivating with the power of wish. Rinpoche chose the latter. There wasn't much power of wish, but it was easy to transform into spiritual power. Furthermore, there was power of wish every day. Even if he didn't do anything but sleep every day, his spirit would gradually become stronger and his strength would increase. Rinpoche felt that he could finally experience the Empress's feeling of being a cheat. I get stronger even when I sleep. What can I do? I'm also very helpless. Rinpoche calculated carefully. Based on the current situation, his spirit would increase by about 5% every month. In other words, in 20 months his divine soul would double. However, as more people went to the tranquil temple to pray and make wishes, this number would also increase. Rinpoche had just returned to the capital, and his first order was for the rearguard commandery to spread the news of the tranquil temple's wishes being fulfilled throughout Tianjin Basin. He had to shape the tranquil temple into a Buddhist holy land in Tianjin Basin as soon as possible. After issuing the order, Rinpoche returned to the palace. When the Empress saw him, she said rather regretfully, "It's a pity that I can't eat it anymore." "What is it?" Rinpoche's head was filled with question marks. "The flood dragons we brought back from the blade sickle race were all burnt. I had people cut them open, but there was nothing edible left. I used to want to taste the 2 flood dragons in the Great Xia Dynasty Palace, but I never had the chance." "What a pity." Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry after hearing the Empress's words. "I'm guessing there are quite a lot of them in the outsider's territory. Even if it's not everywhere, it won't be too rare. There will always be a chance. It's been too long. I don't want to wait any longer. Forget it, I'll personally make a trip and catch one of the 2 in Great Xia." It was unknown which nerve in the Empress's brain had been triggered. She actually couldn't wait for even a moment longer. She was extremely mobile, and after leaving a sentence, she disappeared into thin air. Rinpoche looked up at the sky for a long time before shaking his head silently. The Empress probably wanted to eat the flood dragon of the Great Xia royal family, but unfortunately she wasn't strong enough. Although she was strong enough now, she had been busy with the outsiders for the past few years and had forgotten about it. As a result, this idea was evoked, and she immediately took action. This was an undeserved disaster for the Great Xia royal family. My condolences. Now he could plan how to eat it. He didn't know how big it was. He would cut a section to braise it, steam it, make it into slices of raw dragon, barbecue it, fry it, stew it. Finally, he couldn't forget to leave some for the laboratory. "Your Highness, where's Her Majesty?" Not long after, he met the iron-bespectacled lady, Xenja. Xenja now looked slightly older than the Empress. With her strength, time passed very slowly for her. Her youthful beauty hadn't diminished and she looked a little more mature. Due to the common secret of the electric shock experiment, the two of them were more casual and intimate than others. She went to Great Xia. What's the matter? The Imperial Kitchen asked about how to deal with the charred corpse of the flood dragon. Take me to see it. Ren Baqin was interested. When they arrived at the Imperial Kitchen, Ren Baqin saw the frozen charred corpse. It was 10 meters long and as thick as a bucket. At this moment, its abdomen had been cut open, and it was charred from the inside out. However, it had 2 lumps on its head, 2 claws under its abdomen, a row of spikes on its back and a layer of charred scales. Some of its original form could still be seen. Its mouth was longer and wider, and its teeth were different from those of snakes. This thing doesn't look like a python but more like a crocodile. Ren Baqin sized it up. He originally thought that it would look more like a python. I don't know how strong it is. Since the sickle people spent a lot of effort to capture it, it shouldn't be too weak. Ren Baqin guessed and instructed, leave it here first. I'll get someone to send it to the laboratory. There might be some gains. 3 days passed. Ren Baqin was still dealing with government affairs after the court session ended when he saw a red figure land at the entrance of the hall with a long object in her hand. Your Majesty. Ren Baqin pushed the memorial to the side, got up and greeted. Was the journey smooth? Ren Baqin looked at the thing in her hand. It was a creature that looked similar to the previous corpse, but the horns on its head were bigger, and it had 3 claws under its abdomen. Its body was 13 to 14 meters long. The Empress slammed the flood dragon to the ground. Tie it up and get the Imperial Kitchen to find a way to cook it for me. Ren Baqin's eyes twitched. The body of the flood dragon twitched a few times after being slammed to the ground. Your Majesty, is this thing still alive? It's delicious when it's fresh. The Empress's reason was impeccable. How strong is it? Ren Baqin asked curiously. It's probably between Cardinal Heaven and Kismet Heaven. Ren Baqin was slightly surprised. It was stronger than he expected. Although this was a flood dragon from ancient Chinese mythology, Ren Baqin understood that the so-called legendary creature was just a relatively rare and powerful animal in this world after seeing Qi Shui, a fake Kirin. There was no need to deify it. Furthermore, this was a flood dragon and not a real dragon. After all, its vitality is scarce, and its strength is already beyond my expectations. If it was outside the wall of the 2 worlds, I'm afraid it wouldn't be weak, the Empress said. That's true. In Great Xia, where vitality is scarce, its strength is enough to show how powerful it is. Ren Baqin nodded. This thing's ability is quite interesting. It can actually control water to a certain extent, the Empress commented. Ren Baqin's eyes suddenly lit up. This ability was close to the legendary ability to overturn the clouds and rain. At the very least, it could overturn rivers and seas, right? Perhaps he should think about how to snatch food from the tiger's mouth, snatch this flood dragon from the Empress's mouth, and send it to the laboratory alive. This is mine. Don't even think about it. I'm going to eat it tonight. The Empress seemed to know what Ren Baqin was thinking. She immediately rolled her eyes and said fiercely, how many more are there in Great Xia's palace? Chapter 1250. TSK, the taste isn't bad. The meat is very chewy and fragrant, Ren Baqin commented with satisfaction as he shaved his teeth. Looking at the table, the Empress and Honeysuckle were still gorging themselves. The Empress was the fastest, and half of the dragon meat went into her stomach. The rest went into Honeysuckle's stomach, and he visibly grew fatter like a balloon. This made Ren Baqin click his tongue in wonder. Did it store all the primordial qi contained in the flood dragon meat in its body? Honeysuckle's muscles were bulging when he was born because the energy he inherited from the Empress was too abundant, and it was all stored in his body. This ability was similar to that of a camel. Was fun. Ren Baqin looked at the mother and daughter who were drinking wine on the left and eating meat on the right. Bisi. TSK. Unfortunately, he didn't have the strength of the Empress or Honeysuckle's hoarding ability. He felt full without eating much and could only look at them. By the way, the countries on Earth and the 8-armed race have reached an agreement. Next, they will send a team of envoys to the 8-armed race and the first batch of technologists to attack the 4-leaf grass planet where the Thunder Barbarians are. They invited you to go, but I rejected them. What? As you know, I'm quite interested in the 8-armed race. Being able to learn from them will improve my combat ability. The Empress tilted her head slightly. It's too risky. You are our last trump card, whether it's Dayo or Earth. If you take that step, there's no harm in going. Even if you're at the peak of longevity heaven, You're still one realm away from them if you don't take that step. The eight-armed race isn't like the Earth Spirit race and their combat skills are brilliant, Rinpoche said. In fact, there was another danger, which was the universe. Traveling in the universe was dangerous everywhere. However, for Rinpoche and the Empress, this danger was the least. Rinpoche just needed to grasp the time and leave the cooldown for his space travel skill. If something really happened, they would still be in the void after traveling. This was easy to solve since they just needed to wait for help. The eight-armed race was the most dangerous. If they had any ideas, the Empress would be like a lamb walking into a tiger's mouth. The Empress swallowed a mouthful of dragon meat and drank a cup of erguotu before saying, "Agree to their request." "No, it's too dangerous." Rinpoche immediately refused. He didn't even want to think about it. If anything were to happen to the Empress, it would be too late for regrets. "Your Majesty, you are now the human sovereign of the human race. Although you haven't performed the ancestral worship ceremony yet, your status has already been decided. Your Majesty, you are the final trump card of the human race. With your Majesty's talent, as long as you have enough time, you might have the strength to contend against the heavenly lords. I can break through now. All the preparations I made were based on the assumption that your Majesty could contend with the top experts of the other party." Rinpoche was stunned as he tilted his big bald head and looked at the Empress. His eyes said, "You're King kidding me? I can break through now. I've already taken half a step forward and I've made some progress these days. I think I'll be able to break through in 10 days or at most a month. I can use the experts of the Ba-arm race to familiarize myself with my strength after breaking through." The Empress replied casually as if what she was talking about was a trivial matter. Her gaze didn't even leave the meat in front of her. Rinpoche stared at the Empress for a long time before slamming the table and saying, "You still dare to say that you didn't cheat?" He then rubbed his bald head and said, "I'm going to have to live in 2 separate rooms again. You can go to the brothel and look for that, what's her name again? I forgot." The Empress mumbled as her mouth was stuffed with dragon meat. The Empress rarely saw such a scene when she was eating. After all, no matter how delicious something was, it wasn't rare for her. However, this dragon meat was indeed one of the best delicacies in the world. "Shall I go then? If you dare to do something you shouldn't do, I'll beat you to death." Meanwhile, Two Blossom was laughing his head off. "There are still 2 more dragons in the dragon pond of Great Xia. If I ask for another one, will they give it to me?" Rinpoche began to consider another problem after eating and drinking. "I want both of them. I'll give you half. The head, tail and bones are all yours." The Empress waved her hand. It was rather refreshing. The next day, Rinpoche returned to Earth and passed on the news. The other party was naturally overjoyed and wasn't dissatisfied at all. One had to know that without the support of this top-notch expert, the envoy wouldn't be as confident in facing those barbaric but powerful extraterrestrial races. From the behavior of the eight-armed race when they first arrived on Earth, it could be seen that no matter how advanced one's technology was, even if one could use it to destroy a city or a country, they would still look down on one. Only experts of the same level could talk to them as equals. This was the case even for the eight-armed race, which was more civilized and easier to deal with. For example, the Thunder Barbarians didn't care about you at all and treated you like a pig or a dog. Before Rinpoche rejected them, many people were still thinking about how to get him to agree. Now that he had taken the initiative to change his mind, it couldn't be better. In the next few days, Rinpoche also had to arrange matters on Earth, especially leaving a few Cardinal Heaven experts here to prevent any unforeseen events from happening after he left. Half a month later, Rinpoche, Erhua, and the rest of the envoy group, which included 13 envoys from various countries. They were divided into an ambassador and 12 deputy envoys. This was the problem of having more than one country. Other than that, there were 176 escorts, more than 200 experts, more than 1,500 technicians, and more than 5,800 people from the joint guard teams of various countries. After everyone met, Rinpoche and Erhua boarded a huge spacecraft that was 3,200 meters long. It was 10 times longer than an aircraft carrier, 700 meters wide and 260 meters tall. This was also the crystallization of the highest technology of mankind, and it was enough to carry 6,000 people in space for 16 months. As soon as they boarded the spacecraft, Erhua let out a cry of joy. The faces of the disciples around him had been filled with shock since the start of the battle. Before being informed by the dojo master, they never thought that they would have the opportunity to board a spacecraft and travel to an extraterrestrial civilization. Although humans had long begun to explore the universe and occasionally had news of it, all of this was too far away from them. Rinpoche waved his hand to let these talented disciples move around freely and find their own rooms. Looking at the interior of the spacecraft, there was a bar, a restaurant, and a game hall. In addition, there was a multi-purpose conference room, a liaison office, and so on. The metal floor was covered with a thick carpet, and there were groups of sofas, projectors, and other things in the hall. It had to be said that these two spacecraft were indeed outstanding in terms of enjoyment. In addition to the public facilities, the rooms were divided into 3 classes. Rinpoche's room was one of the best. It was about 50 square meters, and there was a projector in the room that allowed him to view the scene outside the spacecraft through various surveillance cameras. There were no portholes. The spacecraft built on Earth never had portholes because the universe was too dangerous, and humans had just started. Compared to various kinds of glass, the special metal shell was safer. At this time, Rinpoche sat on the sofa and watched the surveillance footage. As the ground shook violently, the scene began to change rapidly. The Earth was getting further and further away from him until it became an aqua-blue planet that wasn't so round. The first stop was the spaceport near the node, a transit station between the two galaxies. Chapter 1251. There seemed to be a passageway in the middle of the node. There was nothing in the middle, and the surroundings were filled with bizarre scenes. The universe, planets, and other things were all distorted into scenes that were beyond human imagination. Many people guessed that these bizarre scenes were the galaxies between the solar system and the Horn Dragon galaxy. Unfortunately, they couldn't find another exit even after sending out tens of thousands of detectors. The detectors would disintegrate upon contact with the distorted scenes and be buried in the dust of the universe. After a long time, a different scene finally appeared at the end of the passageway. It was a small starry sky. The spacecraft was spat out of this exit as if it was a foreign object that had mistakenly entered a mouth. What appeared in front of everyone was a completely unfamiliar starry sky. Rinpoche woke up, opened his eyes, and opened the sleeping cabin door in front of him. "Are we here?" Rinpoche looked at the indicator light beside him, which had turned green. "We're finally here." Rinpoche stretched his back and his joints crackled. It only took 5 days to travel from Earth to the spaceport in front of the node, but it would take 1 month to pass through the node. He went to the wine cabinet, took out a bottle of red wine, and poured himself a glass. He listened to the broadcast informing everyone to go to the dining hall and eat a small amount of food to recover their bodily functions. He sat quietly on the sofa and turned on the projector. "Dad." Honeysuckle rushed in from outside, snatched the red wine from Rinpoche's hand, and began to drink it. "Ha." He took a deep breath, wiped his mouth, and jumped onto the sofa to accompany Rinpoche to watch the scene on the projector. "This starry sky is very beautiful, even more beautiful than what we saw in the solar system." Honeysuckle exclaimed with stars in his eyes. An extremely beautiful nebula was projected on the screen. It was so brilliant that it was like the greatest miracle in the universe. In another direction, 2 resplendent galaxies could be seen. "Dad, do you think this is the same universe as the solar system? Have we transmigrated?" Honeysuckle suddenly had a brainstorm. In fact, many people on Earth had come up with this theory. After all, the cosmological constants here were slightly different from those in the solar system. Rinpoche glanced at this silly child. "I don't know if others are wearing it, but don't you know if you are?" The projection changed several directions and finally saw a few planets in the distant starry sky. "It doesn't look like a horned dragon at all." Honeysuckle was a little disappointed. "Forget it, I'll go to the restaurant to see if there's anything delicious. Dad, do you want some?" "Congee with pork and century eggs. Remember to use cuckoo eggs to make century eggs and the meat of a fortune heaven Hei Langjun. I have them stored in the freezer in the kitchen," Rinpoche said. "Oh." Honeysuckle stood still and pondered for a while. His eyes widened. "Why didn't I know? Are you going to eat it all for yourself?" "You didn't ask." Rinpoche spread his hands and pointed at Lu Hua. "Get rid of those muscles on your body first. Even this set of clothes can't block your power." Honeysuckle looked down at himself. Underneath the clothes, his shoulders and waist were bulging with muscles. Her small face immediately turned pale. "That flood dragon meat is too delicious." Then he clenched his teeth and waved his fists. "In another half a month I will definitely be able to lose weight. Then you'll have to take out the bag of flood dragon jerky that you've been hiding." "What? It's all mine. Even if I gain another 50 kilograms, I won't hand it over." Honeysuckle swore through gritted teeth. Rinpoche spread his hands. I'm not the fat one anyway. He looked at Honeysuckle, who left angrily, and glanced at his thigh-thick arms. Oh, I'm already so fat. Now I should be strong. Men look better when they're strong. Even if I settle for the next best thing, I look better when I'm fat. How can you call yourself a man if you're as thin as an electric pole? Decades ago, due to the cultivation of all the people on Earth, all the celebrities had already become 8 feet tall and had a waist circumference of 8 feet. However, it was said that there was a return to the old ways in the past 2 years. This wasn't a good trend. After a month, they finally arrived at Moros, the home planet of the 8-armed race. They could see planet 4-leaf grass on the other side of the projection. It's time. We will land at the designated location in 3 hours. Is that person really here? 12 pairs of eyes looked at Ambassador Wuxia. It was said that the Empress in red, who had stirred up a sea of blood on the American flag, was on this ship as backup for this diplomatic mission. However, no one had seen her since they boarded the ship. Now that they are here, shouldn't they come out and show themselves? With this in mind, it will be easier for us to do our work in the future. Wuxia was also confident in the eyes of the crowd. As the ambassador this time, he knew some things. However, how would he know if the Empress was here or not? Mr. Rin, please go to the multi-purpose conference room with Madam Qi. We will land in 3 hours, and we would like to seek your opinion on some matters regarding the diplomatic mission. Wuxia pressed the button and stood to the side. I can't control these two anyway. Even if the Empress doesn't show herself, there's nothing I can do. It's useless for you to look at me. Staring at each other? Do you want to make your eyes look big? Do you really think that my eyes are small? Fortunately, the awkward atmosphere in the conference room didn't last long. The automatic doors opened and a man and a woman walked in. Everyone was familiar with the man. His arms were thicker than a human's thighs and he was bald. He looked like a bandit. However, compared to the cold and arrogant red-clothed woman beside him, he was just a rookie. Wuxia heaved a sigh of relief. She had finally shown herself. The others were also relieved. Even the ambassador of the American flag felt the same way. In any case, everyone was now standing on the same side and representing humanity. 3 hours later. In a huge city on a plain in the King's City, countless people looked up at the sky with their mouths wide open. They were much more frightened than the citizens of Gotham when they saw the alien invasion. After all, even though the citizens of Gotham were simple, they were all very knowledgeable. These people from the 8-armed race were really shocked. They saw a black dot getting bigger and bigger until it stopped 2,000 meters above the ground. Everyone could clearly see that it was actually a metal structure, a coffin. The coffin was so big that one could imagine how huge the owner of the coffin was. The higher-ups of the 8-armed race immediately knew what was going on when they discovered the spacecraft. The humans were here. They immediately issued a notice to appease the people and sent a team to welcome them. From the position, the spacecraft had landed on a plain outside the city. The leader of the team, the second ritual, was rather curious. When the third ritual returned from Earth, he couldn't stop marveling at how magical Earth was. It seemed that there were good things everywhere, and even ordinary things had extremely magical effects. For example, a box that could project images in the air. For example, a bracelet or badge that could transmit sound from 1,000 miles away. In her words, the so-called human planet was like the mother goddess's domain, full of magnificent miracles. She was full of anticipation for those magical human creations. Chapter 1252. When the second discipline of the octopus race arrived outside the city, he was first attracted by the 3,000-meter-long spaceship. The protruding alloy plates, the diamond-shaped edges, and the battleship cannons on it were all expressing the beauty of technology. It would be even better if he could ignore the coffin-like overall shape. Then, the bottom of the spaceship opened and 2 elevators descended at the same time. Dozens of soldiers quickly stood around it. Then, a lady in red attracted the second ceremony's attention. The strength. Is this the human expert that the third ceremony mentioned? However, this feeling was very familiar, similar to the feeling when he saw the high priest and the queen. This is the ancestral state? Previously, the third ceremony mentioned that the other party had reached the peak of the supreme realm and was one step away from the ancestral state. How long has it been? The other party has already taken this step? The second ceremony thought to himself as he led his men to welcome them. Naturally, the ambassador of this mixed team was in charge of sending out a batch of high-tech gifts. This time, the humans opened the way with all kinds of gifts since these things weren't worth much on Earth. Most of the things they brought were projectors and solar panels. The projectors also contained a large number of movies translated into the language of the Eight Arms race. They mainly focused on science fiction like Marvel, fantasy, and Shinsha movies. Humans finally understood one thing. When dealing with these powerful alien races, bragging might be more effective than exchanging benefits. At the very least, it would make them more fearful. As for the strength and background of the humans on Earth, the other people of the Eight Arms race didn't know because the Empress was protecting them. When Ren Baqin entered the city, he observed the situation, the living conditions of the people, their mental state, and the number of experts in the Eight Arms race. Ren Baqin knew that the Eight Arms race had a matriarchal structure. Females were more powerful and had greater potential, so most of the experts were female. However, he discovered the miserable state of the Eight Arms race men when he entered the city. They were at the bottom of society, wearing the dirtiest and worn-out clothes, dull eyes, and almost all four arms. Occasionally there were 2 six-armed men who wore more exquisite clothes. However, they still had to lower their heads and stand to the side when encountering men of the same level as them, waiting for them to pass first. From this, it could be seen that the men of the Eight Arms race had almost no social status. In addition, the construction standards of the Eight Arms race were pretty good. Ren Baqin even saw a lot of 5-story pavilions. As for other aspects, they were probably at the level of the Tang and Song dynasties. No matter which race it was, their palaces were all built with gold and jade, displaying the highest level of technology of their race. The Ba-Arm race was no different. He only saw the queen of the octopus race when he arrived at the palace hall. There were 5 females of the Ba-Bai race sitting at the head of the table. One of them had 8 arms that glowed like white jade. She wore a strange long robe and a golden crown. The other 4 on either side also had 8 arms, and their arms had a golden luster of varying intensities. Below them sat 8 arms and 6 arms. "Ah Wang Feng, I've brought him." The second shaman folded his 8 arms in front of his chest, saluted, and sat to the side. "Greetings, Queen of the Octopus race. We're from Earth and we're here to sign an alliance agreement with your race." The ambassador bowed slightly. Ren Baqin noticed that the Empress's body was tense and her expression was solemn. The 5 people on top and the one on the left are all experts from the immortal heaven. The Empress's voice was transmitted into his ears. This news caused Ren Baqin to raise an eyebrow. There were indeed many experts in the Ba-Bai race. He then listened to Ah Wang Feng's introduction. On the left and right were King Guangpei, King Jiwu, King Jiotang, and King Rongchang. The one on the left was the high priest of the Ba-Bai race. This made Ren Baqin feel a little enlightened and he relaxed a little. It turned out that the kings of the other countries had been invited, and there weren't just 6 experts from the immortal heaven here. These 2 concepts were completely different. If one country alone had 6 experts from the immortal heaven, then the 4 countries would have at least 20. This was terrifying. "Before everyone is seated, this king would like to ask a question," King Feng suddenly said. "Please speak." Ah Wang Feng looked at someone in the crowd and asked, "Are you willing to be an ally of the Ba-Bai race?" "She was talking about you, not you guys." Everyone present was shocked and turned to look at Ah Wang Feng's gaze, only to see the Empress in red standing there. "Ah Wang Feng, may I ask?" Wu Yushua hurriedly asked. Everyone's mind was filled with doubts. The Empress understood what he meant and was also a little puzzled. She slowly said, "What do you mean by talking about me alone? Compared to them, I'm more willing to believe in you, an expert on the same level as us. Experts at the reversion stage won't lie, and crafty people won't be able to cultivate to the reversion stage. Therefore, I have more confidence in the future of our 2 races by forming an alliance with you." The Empress chuckled. Her aura changed and she raised her chin proudly. "That's right. At our level, even if we're enemies, we'll be upright." "I agree. Although I'm not in charge of Earth, I'll guarantee your interests. Correspondingly, you have to do what you promised us." "Of course." Ah Wang Feng chuckled. Everyone from the Ba-Bai race smiled to express their joy. Everyone on Earth was dumbfounded. Even Ren Baqin didn't understand what was going on with this sudden change. He only vaguely sensed that there seemed to be some conditions to reach the immortal stage, so the experts who reached this stage agreed with each other more. From the looks of it, this seemed to be a good thing. Wu Yushua also guessed a thing or two and his eyes were filled with joy. As for the people sent by the other countries, their thoughts were more inexplicable. Envy, jealousy, bitterness, and so on. If only our country had such an expert. Of course that was impossible. Even excluding the Empress and Ren Baqin, China was the strongest nation in terms of martial arts, followed by other East Asian countries like Japan, which far surpass the Western countries in terms of martial arts. In that case, I can tell you one thing. Someone wants us to kill you, and in return they will pay us a batch of technology as compensation. After Wang Feng casually finished speaking, the Empress's face turned frosty, and she almost exploded. Not only her but everyone else was also about to explode. What's going on? Pay us a batch of technology as compensation? An earthling? Hire the Babai race to kill the Empress? Rinpoche's face turned ashen, and his eyes were filled with ruthlessness. The others looked at each other in dismay. Wang Feng, is this true? Wu Yushua's face turned ugly, and his chest heaved up and down. He was so angry that his lungs almost exploded. He kept guessing who was so daring. This couldn't be described as daring anymore, it was worse than livestock. Who was the Empress? She was the only expert on Earth, and she was the reason why the human race and the martial arts experts interacted as equals. No matter how great the hatred was, it should be put aside in the face of human etiquette. Now, someone actually hired a foreign race to kill the strongest expert of their own race? This was even when the two sides were in contact and negotiating, preparing to send troops to attack, occupy, and develop another planet. This could already be considered a traitor. You can ask Sanji about this. Wang Feng nodded at the people below. Sanji got up and nodded at everyone. Someone from your side did make such a promise. His name is... Chapter 1253. Sanji thought for a moment before recalling the name. His name is Matthew Perry. He promised us that as long as we kill her, they will give us more technological information in private as a reward. Then he said with disdain, I hate people like him. He would betray his own race and ally with someone like him. We can't believe it. Obviously she's the better choice. A powerful individual who has reached the limit of their abilities would not put too much thought into conspiracies and schemes. They are more trustworthy. Everyone slowly turned to look at one person in the crowd. It was the ambassador of the United States. The ambassador's face turned pale. No, that's impossible. I don't know anything about this. Maybe it's just someone with the same name. Maybe I've remembered wrongly. The ambassador said quickly. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Everyone had different expressions on their faces. When the octopus race ambassador went to Earth, only the top officials of each country could come into contact with her, and among them there was only Matthew Perry. Esteemed Sanji of the octopus race, may I ask who this Matthew Perry is? Wu Yushua asked. I can't remember, but he likes to pinch his nose. Sanji replied casually. Everyone was now sure that the man was the Secretary of State of the United States, Matthew Perry. That guy had a persistent rhinitis and would carry a handkerchief with him to pinch his nose no matter where he was. What a disgrace to mankind. The ambassador of the Empire of the Unsetting Sun was the first to draw a line. I can't believe someone would do something like that. Even thinking about it is a disgrace to mankind. The second was the Gaul Rooster. Although the American government has done many stupid things, it's hard to believe that they would be this stupid. Japan had been following China ever since the rise of martial arts, and their relationship in recent years had been quite good. Their stupidity knows no bounds. The ambassadors all spoke one after another. No one dared to stand on the American side. Moreover, the ambassadors all felt that the Americans were too stupid. How stupid did they have to be to come up with such an idea? I'll write a report on this when I get back, Wu Yushua said with a dark expression. The American ambassador, on the other hand, was at a loss as if he had just been fished out of water. When everyone finished speaking, he said with an expression that was uglier than crying, I don't care if you believe me or not, I know nothing about this. If I can make it back alive, I will mobilize the Musk family and our allies to retaliate against them. I will also find out who is behind this. I believe that the idiot Matthew Perry is not the only one behind this. When Rinpoche saw Wu Yushua looking over, he pondered for a moment and said to Howard Musk, You have fought for a chance to live for the time being. I want all the people behind him. If there is one less, you and your family will pay for it. Then, he said with a chilling tone, I'd rather kill 1,000 wrongly than let one go. Howard Musk almost fell to the ground when he heard that, feeling as if all the strength in his body had disappeared without a trace. Rinpoche's words indicated that there would be a reign of terror as soon as they returned. But this time no one pitied the Americans. Even the people of the Empire of the Unsetting Sun and the Gallus Rooster, who had always been on the same side as the United States, were the same. The Americans were too stupid and too much of a bastard. We will report this matter back. If there is a need, we will provide all the help we can, everyone promised. Rinpoche was still a little scared when he sat down at the table. If the Empress hadn't reached the ancestral level, the eight-armed race might have really done this. According to King Feng, only those who had reached this level would be recognized by them. If that was the case, it would be too dangerous this time. However, on second thought, if the Empress hadn't reached the ancestral level, he wouldn't have agreed either. Just like before they set off, he had rejected them. He felt much better when he thought about it this way. However, this incident still made him vigilant. He also had a deep hatred for certain people. Even exterminating their entire race wouldn't be enough to resolve this hatred. After calming himself down, everything went smoothly. After the rage subsided, the Empress ate even more. Rinpoche watched the dance of the eight-armed race. Even one of them danced like the 1,000-armed Guanyin. The only regret was that the eight-armed race didn't have the habit of stripping like the Aboriginals after drinking. In the following days, the diplomatic mission and the eight-armed race carried out their final negotiations. Rinpoche accompanied the Empress to wander around the capital city and enjoy the scenery of the foreign planet. During this period there was a small interlude. After all, both of them had 2 arms. As long as the eight-armed race was of age, even a male would have 4 arms. As a result, the 2 disabled people attracted a lot of attention. It was all thanks to the people sent by King Feng. In addition, they watched the Empress fight with others. King Jiotang and King Rongchang were both at the beginning of the immortal realm. At first, the Empress was at a disadvantage, but she improved rapidly during the fights. After a month, she was on par with these 2 kings. It had to be said that the Empress was cheating again. Please use this. This is a bloodstone that can quickly restore your strength. King Feng asked me to send it over. A servant girl from the eight-armed race brought over a plate of translucent crystals of various sizes with turbid floccules inside. A bloodstone? Rinpoche curiously picked up a piece and squinted to feel it. It's very similar to a source stone, Rinpoche said. The Empress played with it in her hand and nodded. Indeed, but it has a lot of impurities and isn't as pure as a source stone. The speed at which it emits energy is also much slower. Of course, source stones aren't naturally produced minerals anymore. They have all gone through secondary processing and solidification. Rinpoche shook his head. I don't know about the production of this thing. If it's high, we might be able to do business with them. Rinpoche immediately went to the eight-armed race to ask about it, and the news he received made him quite happy. This item was not rare here. The Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi on the eight-armed race's home planet was not low to begin with, enough for daily cultivation. This kind of blood power stone released Yuan Qi slowly, so many rich families even used this kind of blood power stone to build cultivation rooms. This was good news. The speed of mining raw stones at the border between the 2 worlds was very slow. If they could purchase this stone in large quantities, the production of source stones would increase greatly in the future. Moreover, source stones were definitely a hard currency. Even if they were sold within Dayo, they could still earn a lot of money and use it to increase military expenditures. In addition, Earth might not have noticed this type of bloodstone yet, or perhaps they hadn't paid enough attention to it. One had to know that source stones could be mixed with fuel, explosives, and even some metals to change the structure of objects or increase the characteristics of objects. It could be said to be an important resource. Mastering a bloodstone would give Rinpoche the upper hand in the future interstellar era. If he could exclusively trade this type of bloodstone, there would naturally be a lot of benefits. At the very least, he wouldn't have to sell it to those bastards. Let them play with their eggs. Before that, he had to first think about what he could trade with the eight-armed race. In terms of technology, he couldn't compare to Earth, and the exchange of resources between the 2 worlds. He still needed to bring a large number of aboriginals to fill the territory that he was about to obtain on the 4-leaf clover planet. What was light, didn't take up much space and was of great value to the eight-armed race. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Chapter 1254. Your Highness, after testing the bloodstone that you brought back, we found that the flocks in it aren't impurities but liquefied elemental energy with a very high concentration. The crystals on the outside are impurities, including an element that has never been seen before. Where did Your Highness get it from? How's the quantity? The person in charge of the laboratory found Rinpoche and asked happily. Previously, they had been mining ternary silicon sulfide from the wall between the 2 worlds. It wasn't easy to mine, the process was troublesome, and the quantity wasn't enough. Furthermore, it evaporated too quickly, so the laboratory was often out of stock. This newly discovered bloodstone could release elemental energy slowly and was more suitable for experiments than crystals. The concentration of liquefied elemental energy was also extremely high, at least slightly higher than that of crystals. Therefore, after analyzing the function of the bloodstone, the laboratory immediately treated it as a treasure. "Give me the report." Rinpoche took the report and glanced at it. He could understand some of the data. After all, he had copied so many books in his sea of knowledge and covered a wide range that few people could match. He also remembered a lot of things during the copying process. Even if he couldn't be a scientist, he could still be an expert. After reading it, Rinpoche's eyes lit up. How many crystals can 1 kilogram of this or produce? If it's of this quality, it can produce 3 grade 1 crystals, 10 grade 2 crystals, 389 grade 5 crystals. This was good stuff. The problem now was what to use in exchange. What he could take out now were some of the specialties of Zixiao, such as animals, plants, and medicines. If he wanted to trade in large quantities for a long time, he couldn't use items that were too rare. What else? What else was there? Rinpoche thought for a long time and realized that there were still some things that he didn't know about Earth and the 8-armed race. Some branches of technology developed based on elemental energy. After all, Dayo lacked some unique products from Earth and couldn't completely copy them. After so many years, they had developed some technology with Dayo's characteristics. Although it wasn't as advanced as Earth's technology and was even more backward, it was more suitable for the 8-armed race. After all, the situation of the 8-armed race was similar to that of Dayo. As Earth gradually came into contact with elemental energy and gained a deeper understanding of it, their progress would far surpass Rinpoche. He also had a laboratory on Earth. After so many years, the laboratory of the New World Company was second to none on Earth and had invested in many laboratories and industrial projects. He should be able to do this business before Earth developed technology that surpassed his. At this thought, Rinpoche had confidence in completing the transaction. After all, he understood the situation and thoughts of the octopus race far better than other Earthlings. The Aboriginals were the best template. Without having lived among such a race before, it was difficult to accurately grasp the lifeline based on the speculations of those experts on Earth. Later on, Rinpoche got someone to compile a list of technologies that utilized vitality and selected those that could be traded, especially those that didn't have high technical content and weren't valued by Earth. However, they were very important. One day later, Rinpoche brought her to Earth, race, queen, and Earth. King. Earth, King Feng, Earth, King Year, Earth. From. And, Earth, he, it. Star, King, Man, King, Earth, Yang, King, Star, King, Race. That's good. Earth, King, and King. Race, King, have stone, said were. King, Earth, are stone. I'll have to trouble you then. If there's a need, I'll let you know. The Empress didn't regard herself as an outsider, but this kind of frankness was exactly what King Feng liked. Powerhouses who had reached this stage hated things that were roundabout the most. "I'm here today because I have a deal to discuss with you," the Empress said and looked at Rinpoche. King Feng frowned. The status of males in the octopus tribe was very low. But these days she also knew the identity of these two people, so she was able to listen patiently. "We once helped a planet with a technological level similar to yours reach a higher level. I have a list of technologies in my hands that should be of great help to you. These are things that no one else can give you. It's not that they're hiding it, but it's because they haven't come into contact with it and don't know much about it." Wang Feng looked at the Empress and saw her nod her head. The smile on his face became even wider. "You're not together?" "Together, but I'm exposed to more things than they are. For example, the planet with a technological level similar to yours is something they don't understand," Rinpoche said. "The technologies that I can provide you are related to the development and partial utilization of the power in the blood power stone. We call it vitality and its characteristics are." Rinpoche spoke with fervor and assurance. He explained Dayo's understanding of the characteristics of vitality and briefly talked about the results of the use of vitality. As expected, this piqued King Feng's interest. After all, the blood power stone wasn't that valuable to the octopus tribe. Exchanging some very ordinary things for valuable technologies was a very worthwhile deal for the octopus tribe. Moreover, after obtaining these technologies, they would be able to use the blood power stone to a higher level, which was equivalent to turning waste into treasure. The contract was signed very quickly. After inquiring and finding out that Earth really didn't have any research on the Blood Power Stone, it only took 3 days to complete an exclusive licensing deal that would last for 15 years. For example, the Octopus tribe would provide Rinpoche with the first batch of 300,000 tons of Blood Power Stone every year, followed by 80,000 tons every year for a total of 1.5 million tons over 16 years. This was to be used in exchange for more than 170 types of vitality utilization technologies in Rinpoche's hands. In addition, there would be an additional 100 technologies in the next 16 years. In addition, from the second year onward, 150,000 tons of Blood Power Stone would be sold to Earth every year, and Rinpoche would have the exclusive right to sell them. It had to be said that the Empress played at least half of the role in signing this agreement. In fact, this was both a trade and a return of the peach. In addition to the technologies, the Empress would also repay him. After signing the agreement, Rinpoche almost wanted to celebrate with the Empress. Fortunately, his rationality told him that staying alive was more important. Even though it was only 100,000 tons per year, it would be 1.5 million tons over 16 years, and 150,000 tons per year, which would be a total of 2.25 million tons. However, these things weren't cabbages, they were crystals. 1 kilogram of Blood Power Stone could be used to produce 3 top-grade crystals. These crystals could be piled up to form a group of experts, not to mention that the laboratory could be used as much as it wanted. The Empress and the others would be able to fill their houses with crystals in places rich with vitality outside the wall of the two worlds. Their cultivation speed would probably skyrocket. In addition, Rinpoche also wanted to use the Blood Power Stone to build a hall for his cultivation. Well, the hall was too big and a secret room was fine too. While the Earth diplomatic mission was surveying the terrain and choosing the location of the bilateral trade city, Rinpoche spent a month bringing over a group of sword masters and aboriginal winged cavalry warriors. Among them were 2 experts from Longevity Heaven. The former were the first batch of personnel to set up the laboratory here, while the latter were used to guard his warehouse in the trade city. After conquering the 4-leaf clover planet, he would have his own territory. Faced with the sudden appearance of a group of burly and ferocious-looking bears, the Earth diplomatic mission was at a loss. Only Wuxia looked pensive. It was obvious that he knew something that was circulating among the higher-ups. However, he still didn't understand what Rinpoche was going to do. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, Bookhouse. Chapter 1255. Your Majesty, a round trip from here to Earth will take 7 months. Every month, I can bring back 70 Aboriginals or 120 Jing tribe and people from the Yin Nation. Each trip consisted of 6 Aboriginals and 6 women. Each Kismet Heaven winged cavalry warrior weighed only 250 kilograms, while the women weighed about 50 kilograms. This was a very simple math problem. 7 months on Earth could bring back nearly 500 Aboriginals or more than 800 Jing tribe members. 1 year later, the number might even increase by half. This would be very beneficial to the development of the 4-leaf clover planet in the future. After all, the country could rely on immigrants, but he could only use robots or hired people. It was better to use the Aboriginals and Jing tribe members instead. Although they ate more, their wages were low, they had few demands, were loyal, and were strong. If they lost the war with the foreign races in the future, these people could also be used as seeds. This was also a way out. This was official business as well as official business. Compared to returning to Earth, the benefits of staying here were greater. As for those damned bastards, as long as 2 disciples brought the news back to the martial arts center, the experts left on Earth would naturally let them know what it meant to have weeds grow on one's grave when the wildfire never burns. Rinpoche felt that something was wrong. However, it didn't matter. In any case, that was what it meant. Otherwise, what was the purpose of leaving a Longevity Heaven expert and many Cardinal Heaven experts on Earth? Wasn't it just to quell trouble when there was a situation? Go back to Earth and kill. The Empress was simple and direct. To her, nothing was more important than making her feel carefree. Was there a need to hesitate? If it was 7 or 70 years later, the Empress would still consider whether to take revenge personally. There was no need to consider 7 months at all. I also think that killing is more important. The most important thing is to kill those who want to frame me. Rinpoche's tone changed and he agreed with her. The scene changed. More than 2 months later, Rinpoche opened his eyes again and opened the hibernation chamber. He turned on the projector and saw that in the pitch-black starry sky, a huge cross-shaped spaceport with a ring outside could be seen in the distance. Countless lights lit up the spaceport, and spaceships entered it from time to time. This was the distribution center for supplies from Earth to the Horn Dragon Galaxy. A large number of supplies had been gathered here to provide logistics for the upcoming expedition. I'm back. Ren Bachien stretched lazily, pushed open the door and found Howard Musk. Do you have any encrypted communication devices that can contact our people on Earth? I'm sorry. Currently, only each country has its own encrypted communication system. I have to at least reach the moon before I can contact my family, Howard Musk said apologetically. Return to Earth. I'll give you 3 days. Remember, I want all the masterminds behind the scenes. In the future, if I find out which one is missing, I will use you to replace it. Ren Bachien's tone was calm, but Howard Musk's hair stood on end. He knew that the other party would do as he said. Please rest assured. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Howard Musk placed one hand on his chest and bowed. When he stood up again, his face was filled with killing intent. Even if the other party didn't say anything, he wouldn't let those bastards off. And that bastard who encouraged him to fight for this position. When the spaceship arrived at the space station, countless radio waves began to transmit in the solar system. Back in the Horn Dragon Galaxy, there was only one public information channel. Everyone had a tacit understanding not to mention this matter in the public channel. However, when they arrived at the space station, messages were sent back to Earth. China. It seems like there's going to be a big commotion again. An old man frowned after recovering from his shock. So be it. If it were something else, there might be room for discussion. If it were me, I wouldn't let this matter rest either. Let them be. Some people are reaping what they sow. Another old man chuckled and closed his eyes to rest after speaking in a rocking chair. Another middle-aged man pushed the rocking chair back and forth. The rising sun city. The queen, who was now in her 50s, was sitting in her room. After receiving the news, she stood in front of the window in a daze. That night more than 20 years ago reappeared in her mind. Some people don't learn from their mistakes and always want to provoke people they shouldn't provoke. Contact Mr. Prime Minister. And the ongoing talks. Those people won't be in the mood to care about what we are going to talk about. Germany and Italy, stop the joint military exercise between NATO and the United States and withdraw immediately. Fighting nation, transfer the Northern Fleet to the Bering Strait. Explain? There's no need to explain. Let them condemn us. As long as we can cause trouble for the United States, we will do it. Japan, stop all commercial cooperation with the United States. Keep your distance from them. Did something happen to the Southern Dynasty? Oh, the Southern Dynasty people didn't know anything. Almost at the same time, all the major countries in the world stopped all ongoing talks with the United States, canceled all visits, and even the military exercises that had already been gathered together were withdrawn in advance. The whole world was in an uproar. They had no idea what was going on. It was as if overnight, the second largest country in the world had become the target of public criticism and the enemy of the whole world. We were isolated. Countless Americans were filled with indignation after the shock. But how did things become like this? Countless experts and scholars appeared on the internet and analyzed the situation in the past 2 days. However, no matter how they analyzed, they couldn't find the reason. What? She's not dead? What? Why didn't those alien bastards keep their word? Even the Gallic roosters drew a line with us? Alright, you don't need to tell me about this. What? I don't care, I don't F***king care about anything now. Matthew Perry's eyes were red as he vented crazily in the office. Yes, when he found out that the woman wasn't dead and stepped on the spaceship, he knew he was dead. What United States, what identity, what wealth, what family, what reputation, none of it mattered anymore. He didn't understand why those damn 8-armed alien bastards had changed their minds. Weren't those aliens very powerful? After a long time, Matthew Perry slumped on the chair with a dull look in his eyes. After a long time he came back to his senses and opened his address book. That woman is back. Those bastards changed their minds. We're dead. Not us, it's you. You're the one who did this, have you forgotten? Don't worry, your family will live a good life, your family will be glorious. That's my promise. F***ck, you bastard. Matthew Perry was filled with anger as he smashed the communicator. In a manor in the United States, a middle-aged man said to the person beside him, Matthew's mission is over. Don't give him a chance to speak. Clean up all the clues. After giving the order, the middle-aged man remembered the conversation he had with his father more than 20 years ago. The Earth doesn't need a Superman, and we don't need a Superman who is beyond our control and can easily take our lives. We will be above everyone and control everything because we are the Melon family. She is very powerful, but she is only a human, not a god. As long as there is a small opportunity, we can achieve our goal. We have enough patience, we have enough opportunities, we have enough means and resources to do everything we want to do. We are the Melon family. The middle-aged man smiled. Failed? No, this is not important. Failure is only temporary and we will succeed eventually. Everyone who likes The Pretty Boy from the Empress's Family, please bookmark. The Pretty Boy from the Empress's Family is a hot topic. Chapter 1256. It feels much better to be on the ground. I don't feel at ease in the sky. I hate spacecraft. Ren Baqin heaved a sigh of relief when he got off the spacecraft. Hua and the Empress had been sent back to Dayo by him. Ren Baqin consciously stood at the back of the welcoming party. The diplomatic mission was now the main character. His gaze swept across the crowd, and he noticed that the officials of the United States had grim expressions on their faces. Amidst the joyous and celebratory expressions, he stood out from the crowd. However, Ren Baqin wasn't able to leave and was instead invited to a room. Mr. Ren. Every time I see you, I feel that I'm getting old, the old man on the screen lamented. Therefore you probably don't like to see me. Haha, you must be joking. The old man chuckled. The two chatted for a while before the old man said, I heard about this matter. From a personal point of view, I understand what you are going to do. Of course, the nation is also standing behind you. Ren Baqin understood. In fact, he never thought that someone would stand in his way. Both emotionally and logically, he was on the side of reason. I only hope that it won't be as spectacular as the last time. That time I was shocked and worried a lot. This time the scene will be smaller. After all, peace is the main theme of the world now. Don't worry. We are professionals. Ren Baqin saw that the other party was so understanding and naturally gave him face. However, the old man's expression was a little strange. That's right, we are professionals. The only thing he regretted was that Matthew Perry was dead, and he couldn't kill him with his own hands. It was said that he committed suicide to escape punishment, but only idiots would believe that. This time, Ren Baqin was going to dig out the bastard behind this, stuff his head into his ass and suffocate him to death. It was very fitting for the way those bastards died. After returning to Wuxia City to rest for a few days, he received news from Howard Musk. The Melon family and the Dugan family? Are you sure it's them? Are there any missing people? Ren Baqin sat on the sofa and looked at the list as he asked in a dull and dignified voice. Of course, this isn't only a betrayal to you, but also a disgrace to me. Howard Musk sat behind the table behind the projection with a serious expression. They cleaned up everything, even Matthew Perry's house, and believed that there was nothing in Matthew Perry's personal safe at the bank that he needed. Unfortunately, they did everything, but Matthew Perry left a clue somewhere else and we found it. I've sent you the identities and addresses of all the people from these two families, as well as some other people involved in this matter. And we will send you a new one every 12 hours. I got it. I will remember what you did this time. Ren Baqin nodded. He felt that he really needed to keep two acquaintances in the United States. For example, this matter would be very useful. Thank you for your tolerance, Your Excellency. Also, the Musk family is honored to be remembered by Your Excellency. Howard Musk stood up and bowed. He was somewhat excited. He did not expect to receive such a pleasant surprise. It would be beneficial for the Musk family if they could establish a relationship with him. Even in the interstellar era, the influence of this person and the power he represented couldn't be underestimated. He wasn't a fool like the Melon family or the Dugan family. A few days later, Ren Baqin and the Empress appeared in Wuxia City. The Empress then dragged Ren Baqin into the air and walked step by step toward the other side of the ocean. This scene wasn't hidden from anyone. As the most famous couple on Earth, almost all the countries knew about their movements in an instant. There were many people gloating over their misfortune. There were also many people who had been paying attention and wanted to evaluate their combat strength. The only one who wasn't calm was the United States, which was like an ant in a pan of oil. This time we have to keep our movements low. Ren Baqin was carried, by the Empress. Ren Baqin was being supported by the Empress and said seriously, I haven't made a move yet, the Empress replied faintly. Well, when we make our move, let's be quiet and not cause an uproar. Ren Baqin thought about it and felt that there was no problem. Although the Empress walked step by step and didn't look fast, It only took 4 hours to reach the United States. Everyone was paying attention to the movements of the two. The President of the United States sat in his seat with his hands crossed and his head slightly lowered. Charles Mellon sat calmly in his manner and looked at the sunlight outside the window. He believed that he hadn't left any traces behind. Just like the last time, this couple couldn't find him. Although the two of them looked scary, humans were not animals. Intelligence was the most dangerous thing. The Dugan family? Old Dugan didn't hide well this time. Someone found him. I hope that after today the Dugan family will still exist, Charles Mellon muttered softly as he got up and opened a bottle of red wine. But how did they find the Dugan family? Who helped them? Or was it discovered by China? It seems like I have to be more careful. In the suburbs of the City of Angels, a manor had been turned into powder. When old Dugan realized that he was the target of the two, he looked desperate and bitter. However, he didn't escape and only ordered his people to hide. These two wouldn't stay in the United States forever. As the Empress, dressed in red, stood in the air, she first felt the fear and despair of the people in the manor below. Then she happily raised her hands and pressed them down. The manor, which covered an area of more than 100 acres, seemed to have been run over by a road roller. The entire area sunk by 1 meter and became flat without any protrusions. Buildings, walls, gates, flowerbeds, vehicles, machinery, everything was deformed, flattened, and mixed with the soil. Everyone who saw this scene sucked in a breath of cold air. The visual effect of this kind of lethality wasn't any less than that of a nuclear bomb. All the military departments were frantically calculating the energy response at that moment. 273,000. When the Empress appeared, everyone had already detected that her energy level had increased from tens of thousands to 200,000. When she attacked, the energy response soared again and reached a terrifying 270,000. It seemed like this wasn't her limit. Be quiet. Ren Bachien looked down in a daze. There was already a depression in the ground that was dozens of acres in radius. The originally luxurious manor was now completely gone. There's no one alive. Very quiet. The Empress looked at him with sparkling eyes. She was very sure that there wasn't anyone alive. There's no one, no manor, nothing left. Perfect operation. Well done. Ren Bachien gave a thumbs up. Mellon. Get rid of the big ones first and then look for the small ones. Perhaps some people can help us catch those bugs, tie them up, wrap them up, and deliver them to us by express delivery. Then, everyone saw the two people turn in another direction. Mellon held his wine glass. These two people were actually heading in the direction of the City of Friendship, and he suddenly had a bad feeling. No, they won't know it's me. They cleaned up after the incident and didn't leave any traces. Why are they heading in this direction? What are they going to do? Who's their target? Seeing the two people rushing in this direction, Charles Mellon felt more and more uneasy, and his forehead began to sweat. No matter who their target is, it's better to change locations just in case. The basement won't work. It's impossible to hide from that kind of power. Someone arrange a flying car and leave now. Charles Mellon quickly walked outside and ordered loudly. His tone was full of anxiety. When these two people rushed in his direction, he realized the fear in his heart. It was left behind more than 20 years ago. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.